Hi everyone, welcome to Monash Australs 2020. My name's Gabby, I'm one of the conveners. And you've also got Tamika and Glenn, if they wave, who are also helping to convene the tournament. We'd like to say a very big welcome for everyone for attending today. I know with everything that's going on in the world at the moment that Australs has had to change format. And as much as we can't see you all in person, we are really excited to have participants from all over Australasia and to be able to see you all virtually across the next week or two. Just to give you a bit of an idea of how large this Australs is, as far as we're aware, it's probably one of the largest Australs that has ever been held. In the application process, we had applications for over 170 teams. However, just due to logistics, we've only been able to hand out approximately 140 team slots. So overall, we've got about 600 participants all attending this evening. We're all very excited to see how Australs will go over the next week. Where as the organising committee, we're all here, so feel free to drop us a message on Facebook or WhatsApp if you have any questions. There's also some guides up online about technical issues and being able to access debates. I'll pass it on to Tamika, to Glenn, who's just going to go over some key information for how things will work this evening. Glenn, we can't hear you. You're on mute.
That always happens. It's going to happen to multiple people, I'm sure. So for tonight, we'll start, we'll just give a quick Orgcom briefing before we introduce William from the Faculty of Law at Monash, who are our major sponsor for the tournament, to give a welcome on behalf of Monash University and the Monash Faculty of Law. In terms of the key people, we've got a number of them listed there, and they'll go through various briefings today. These are our contact details for the Orgcom. So you can contact us via WhatsApp. You can also contact us on Facebook if you need. You can message the page, post in the group. Any of that will try and help you. If we're not the right people to go to, we'll pass you on, whether that's to the AGCOR, Tab Team, Language Equity. We'll make sure that if you need something, you're able to get that throughout the tournament. In terms of debate streams, we will be trying to stream 2 debates per round. Those debates will be picked by us, basically, and we'll be live streaming them on YouTube. We'll then share the links for them in the Facebook group and on our Facebook page, so you can watch them. We will approach debates after topic selection has been done to ensure everyone consents to be in those live streams. So if we come into your debate room and you and ask if you consent, please let us know. If you don't, that's fine. But if you do, it would be great to be able to live stream your debate and show that to people who aren't able to compete in the tournament. Because of that, and also just due to the logistics and privacy, we won't be allowing any observers, that includes coaches, into any other debates throughout the, at least the out rounds of the tournaments. Finals may be different, but we'll brief you on that closer to the date. But unfortunately, that means there will be no observers for any other debates. This is the schedule for today. I'm sure you all have seen this in the group. If you haven't, make sure you join that Facebook group. We will be posting the schedules for each day into that Facebook group the previous night, as well as the WhatsApp group if you don't have access to Facebook. So make sure that you keep on track of that, just so that you don't miss something coming up. Tomorrow's schedule is here. We have 2 rounds tomorrow, followed by the Women's Forum in the evening or after the final round of debates. The rounds, you'll be able to find out how to access that from the tab briefing later. In terms of the Women's Forum, that will be in briefing room 1. We'll give you the link to that tomorrow. So day 3 will have the rounds 3, 4 and 5, as well as POC Forum. POC Forum is an autonomous forum for people of colour that again will be in briefing room 1 and will provide more details closer to the date. Our final day of debates, round 6, 7, and 8, we will aim to be doing the break following round 8, the break announcement. That may run quite late, particularly for some time zones, unfortunately, but we'll try and make that as early as possible, and we'll give you notice of that before that happens. In terms of day 5, usually a rest day, but simply because of time zone constraints, we will be having finals on that day. So there'll be 3 days of finals. That will at least be the open partial double octo finals. However, depending on break sizes for ESL and EFL breaks, which haven't been decided yet, the octo finals and quarterfinals for that will be on day 5. We'll also have a council that day, as well as a webinar from the Monash Law faculty, a major sponsor, about advancing your career and using debating skills. Day 6, we'll have most of our finals. Again, we'll release these every night prior to the debate, prior to the day, so you'll be able to access them as you need. And finally, for the grand final day, we will have the grand finals as well as the open semi-finals and closing ceremony. Day 6 and 7 are subject to change. Depending on the location of teams debating those days, we may change the days to be earlier. To be able to fit them in a bit better, but that just depends on the teams that are competing in those dates, so in those debates. I will now pass you over to William Lai from the Monash Law faculty to give a welcome on behalf of the Monash Law faculty.
Just quickly, I just want to introduce William with a proper introduction, give you a little bit of an introduction. I just want to quickly say thank you all for joining us today. We're very excited to get this tournament underway. And so, as Glenn has said, we're going to be hearing from William Lai, who is a QC and a current lecturer and convener of the Monash Law Unit. He holds a bachelor's degree in science, laws, and a master's of laws, and he's very involved in community and professional development. He's also a founding member of the immediate past national vice president and immediate past national vice president of the Asian Australian Lawyers Association, which is an association that promotes cultural diversity in the legal profession. He's also one of the patrons of the North American Australian Lawyers Alliance Incorporated. Also, on Australia Day in 2017, Mr. Lai was awarded the Order of Australia Medal for service to the law, to business, and to the promotion of cultural diversity. In the same year, at the 2017 Australian Law Awards, Mr. Lai won the Barrister of the Year Award and the Lawyers Weekly Excellence Award. William is the first barrister of Malaysian Chinese descent appointed Queen's Counsel in Australia. So we are very grateful to have him here today to present on behalf of the Monash Law faculty, as the faculty has been instrumental in allowing us to make this tournament occur online. Given all the technical issues, they have been very supportive. So thank you, Mr. Lai. Over to you.
Thank you, Tamika, for your very kind introduction. I am honored to be asked to deliver the opening speech for the 2020 Australasian InterVarsity Championship hosted by Monash University and the Monash Association of Debaters. Can I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting, wherever you are located, and pay my respects to all elders, past and present, and the Aboriginal elders of other communities who may be here with us today. On behalf of Monash University, and in particular the Monash Faculty of Law, I welcome each and every one of you attending this year's competition. My name is William Lai, and I am a pracademic, as opposed to an academic, practicing as an arbitrator, barrister, and mediator, and also teaching contract law, property law, advocacy, and mooting competition as Monash University's chief mooting coach at the Faculty of Law. It is a privilege for Monash Law faculty to be a platinum sponsor of the 2020 Australs competition. On your behalf, I would like to thank and formally acknowledge our Dean, Professor Brian Horrigan, for his leadership and support of this year's competition. The Australasian InterVarsity Debating Championship is the peak debating tournament in Australasia that occurs, as you know, every year around this time. And it is winter in Melbourne, just to let you know, for those who are sitting in the warmth of your own country. Well, the world as we know it today has changed forever due to the pandemic. We are, however, in this together, and we are still engaging with one another, but we are now engaging differently. So how great it is that Monash Association of Debaters and the Monash Faculty of Law were able to adapt to collaborate and transform this year's competition to be performed online instead of cancelling it. This will be the first time it will be hosted online. And no doubt it will be an important blueprint for future competitions. It seems as though transitioning this event online has enabled participants who may not have physically been able to make it to Melbourne for the originally planned event to be able to participate now. And as you have heard, there is a staggering number for this year's competition. We have over 550 university students participating with about 140 teams that each has 3 members. And no doubt you will go through the 7 rounds of debates throughout Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday. And then these will be followed by those final series in the 3 language categories, either English as a foreign language, as a second language, or the open category. So this year will be one of the most diverse competitions with students competing from a very wide variety of countries, including Australia, New Zealand, Malaysia, India, Bangladesh, China, Nepal, Singapore, Philippines, Hong Kong, Macau, Pakistan, South Korea, Vietnam, Indonesia, and Japan. And I hope I haven't missed anyone out. Again, we warmly welcome you to our Cole Melbourne, and also welcome the adjudicators from all over the region who will adjudicate the debates for each round. Many of you are pursuing degrees in law, business, commerce, engineering, medicine, and other professional industries. You are here because of your interest and passion in public speaking and developing critical thinking skills to tackle important local and global issues confronting us today. Each of your voices is unique and will play a central role in leading change for equality, diversity, and inclusion. By projecting your respective voices in the community that you belong to, you will be a tower of strength to others. Topics of debate in this competition vary greatly and generally cover topics of interest such as economics, feminism and social issues, politics, international relations, criminal law, human rights, education, sport, environment, science and technology, media and arts. You've covered everything. For each of you competing this week, your debating skills will no doubt improve. These skills will be valuable to you and a great addition to your education and career development. It will do you in good state when you transition into the workforce. So I encourage you to network amongst each other throughout the week of competition. It's harder not doing it face-to-face, but through this new platform that we're also used to, we can do it. And take advantage also of the additional webinar being held next Wednesday. It is on the topic of advance your career, where you will hear from a panel of industry professionals about utilizing and adapting their own debating skills in their careers. Finally, this year's competition would not have happened without the many hours of time expended by people passionate about promoting debating to a wider audience. On your behalf, can I thank the following people: the chief adjudicators, Bobby Ruitang from Indonesia, Madeline Schultz from Australia, and the other deputy chief adjudicators who are helping: Selini Basri from Malaysia, Joe Escroft, New Zealand, Kevin Lee, who's Australia, and Sarah Yoon from South Australia. Of course, the organizing committee, who are the conveners here and the host of this event in Melbourne, to Glenn Donahue, Tamika, Gabrielle, the TAB director, Viran Wirasikara, and all the bid advisors, Alison and Mary. You all have worked hard to bring this competition to a reality. And on behalf of everyone, I just want to express our thanks to you. Now, my final note is to leave all competitors with my adapted version of the saying from Sun Tzu, the master strategist in debates. He said this, and it is in my adaptation: if you know yourself and you know your opponent's debating techniques, the chances of you winning your debate is at least 70%. If you know yourself, but you don't know your opponent's crafty approach to unsettling your arguments, the chances of you winning your debate is either 50-50 or less than 50%. If you don't know yourself and you don't know your opponent, you will most likely lose your debate. Ladies and gentlemen, good luck and thank you. Back to you, Tamika.
Many thank you for that wonderful speech. And that's a really great quote. I'm sure there's a lot we can all learn from that. Knowing yourself, I guess, is the most important thing. Now, after that wonderful speech, we will move on to our equity briefing. So if we could get you all to raise the equity team to raise their hands, Glenn will transfer you to the panelists and to take over the equity briefing for today.
Hey, can people see the screen that I just shared? And also, can people hear?
Yeah, we should be able to.
Yeah, okay, cool. Hopefully. Cool. So, hi, I'm Ellie. We're going to be going through the equity policy with you, hopefully fairly quickly. So I'll be scrolling through the equity policy, so you can read it as we go. I'm going to be starting to discuss the preamble or the introduction and the scope of discriminatory conduct. And then obviously we'll go through the rest of the policy after that. Please do pay attention. It is obviously really important because we want everyone to be as comfortable in this tournament as possible, and following the equity policy is essential for that. Also, you're expected to know and understand the equity policy as a participant of the tournament. So in the introduction, basically, what is the purpose of equity? We're here to provide an inclusive, safe, equitable, and respectful tournament. We want everyone, regardless of personal characteristics or differences, to feel accepted and to feel comfortable debating. And the policy that we've put together explains what behaviours will not be tolerated in the interest of making sure everyone feels comfortable in this tournament. Additionally, it outlines the process for resolving complaints if and when they arise. This policy is not exhaustive. You can obviously talk to us about things that are not included in this policy, and we can do the equity process, even if an issue is not included in this policy. So do feel free to bring all equity related incidents to our attention, even if you don't want to make a complaint or if you don't want some punitive action to occur, do bring it to our attention if it would make you feel more comfortable or happier in this tournament to do so. So overall, we want you to feel comfortable, we want you to feel safe, we want to facilitate discussion, education, and to make this tournament a safe space for all. Here are your equity officers. Our contact details are at the bottom of the policy. They're all over the place. If you need to find them, you're welcome to contact us individually on Discord, via the equity email, and so on. All of those contact information are provided around. So hopefully they're not too hard to find. The scope of this policy applies to everyone involved in the tournament. So that includes, but is not limited to, debaters, adjudicators, members of the adjudication core, members of the organizing committee, the tab team, and observers. So anyone participating in the tournament, and if you are participating in the tournament, you are bound by this policy. The policy also applies for the duration of the tournament. So that includes registration, briefings, during rounds, during debates, and between those debates, as well as interactions that might not occur during debates or during the tournament exactly, but within the context of the tournament. So for instance, using Zoom or Discord or another medium that is related to the tournament. So any behavior which occurs within the context of the tournament done by any participant at the tournament is bound by this equity policy. So moving on, let's talk about what discriminatory conduct looks like. This is really important because we would like this tournament to be equitable for everyone. So it's important to understand what unequitable behavior consists of, or what it looks like. Notably, it can be unintentional or on purpose. It can be simply a misunderstanding, or it could be malicious. Regardless, it's important to deal with it because we do want people to feel that they have an equal and fair chance in this tournament. We will not treat different behaviors or different instances as the same. All cases will be treated on the basis of their specifics, and all cases will be treated with confidentiality. They'll only be shared with the CA team or Orcom if we are required to do so by the situation and with consent. So you can rely upon confidentiality if you reach out to the equity team. So to quickly define prohibited behaviors, importantly, this is not a exhaustive list of prohibited behaviors. If you do something else which is bad, that's still bad, but these are the main ones. So bullying is a repeated and or unreasonable behavior directed towards an individual or a group that could be physical or psychological, probably not physical in the context of an online tournament, but regardless, it will include behaviors that intimidate, offend, degrade, humiliate, undermine, or threaten. And that could include pressuring another individual or group to do something that they're uncomfortable with. Secondly, direct discrimination. So direct discrimination is if you treat another individual or a group less favorably on the basis of a protected attribute. And we'll go through those specific protected attributes later, but essentially an example could be giving a loss to a debater because they're a member of the LGBTQIA+ community. So related to this direct discrimination point, one particularly problematic form of discrimination in the context of debating is discrimination on the basis of language status and proficiency. Language status and proficiency, or an individual's accent, are protected attributes under the Code of Conduct. You should not treat someone in a discriminatory manner because they have an accent, because of their national origin, or because of their fluency in English. And if you do, that is grounds for an equity complaint. If adjudicators do this, we will talk to the adjudication core about it with your consent, and it's something that will be acted on. So what would this kind of discrimination look like? It could be things like penalizing speakers for having accents that you don't recognize. It could be imposing your personal preferences or your culture's conceptions of what good style or persuasive style looks like on all participants, or imposing your personal preferences or your culture's conceptions of what arguments are capable of being persuasive on all participants. We also acknowledge here that certain individuals are more vulnerable to face discrimination on multiple facets of their identity. These factors intersect and they multiply, which means, for instance, an ESL or EFL speaker who is also a gender minority is vulnerable to discrimination on account of their language proficiency as well as their gender. undervaluing the contributions of a speaker or an adjudicator because of their background happens in many ways, and you should all be involved in stopping that from happening. And the way we hope you would stop that from happening would be to introspect about your biases, identify them, and work hard to improve. You should pay attention to your own failures and be eager to listen and learn from others when they fall short. Indirect discrimination is also discrimination. You should also not do it. But this is when you impose or attempt to impose a requirement, condition, or practice which functionally, if not intentionally, disadvantages an individual or group. So for instance, if you have some sort of rule that is like people who don't have a speech impediment, the only people who can score above 77, that functionally discriminates against people with a speech impediment. And so it still counts as discrimination, even if there's sort of an extra step there, even if it's indirect. Harassment is any unwelcome, offensive, abusive, belittling, or threatening behavior that humiliates, offends, or intimidates someone on the basis of a protected attribute. Sexual harassment is included, but not limited to, making a demand or request for sexual favors, making remarks of a sexual nature, sharing sexually explicit material, or any other physical, verbal, or non-verbal conduct of a sexual nature. Do not do that. Vilification is the public incitement of harassment, contempt, or severe ridicule of another individual or a group on the basis of a protected attribute. Victimization is causing detriment to a person on the basis of any protected attribute, or if they've initiated a complaint procedure. So if someone has made an equity complaint against you, you should not attempt to harm them for doing that. And finally, heckling adjudicators is if you repeatedly engage in behavior that causes disturbance to an adjudicator during their oral adjudication. So if you do something like discuss the verdict with your teammates with your microphone unmuted, if you speak over that judge, if you interrupt them or badger them, that can make them feel very uncomfortable. Or leaving the room prior to the completion of the feedback from the judge is also offensive. So in general, we would recommend that, or we require that you are respectful when asking questions to the adjudicator, and any feedback is constructive, not and not something that would make that adjudicator feel intimidated or uncomfortable. So that is a non-exclusive list of things which you should not do, which are equity violations, and which can cause someone to initiate the equity process against you or with you. So yeah, let's quickly go through the protected attributes. Obviously, these are important because these are particular attributes that might pose barriers to people engaging with debating. And it is really important to stop these attributes from creating barriers and making people feel uncomfortable or treating them differently as a result of those attributes. So the policy prohibits any participant or group of individuals from discriminating, harassing, bullying, or vilifying people on the basis of these protected attributes. They are age or age group, caste, Indigenous culture and or identity, debating ability or institutional affiliation, disability, and that includes but is not limited to past, present, and future disabilities, genetic predispositions to a disability, or behavior which is a manifestation of a disability. Gender identity, that includes gender-related identity, appearance, mannerisms, or any other gender-related characteristics or expression of a person. But it is not limited to the way people express or present their gender. And you should recognize that someone's gender identity may not necessarily be binary, or may well not be what you assume it to be. Infectious disease, for instance, HIV status, intersex status, language proficiency or accents, marital or relationship status, mental health status, sexual practices or experience, for example, previous partners or the lack of previous partners, or particular experiences, including sexual assault or harassment. Political affiliations, beliefs, or ideologies, pregnancy or personal experiences of abortion, race, color, descent, national, religious, or ethnic origin or ethno-religious background, religious affiliation, belief, views, or practice, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status and background, and that can include a person's accent and their proficiency in English. And then finally, any other attribute where discrimination causes or perpetuates systemic disadvantage, undermines human dignity, or adversely affects the equal enjoyment of a person's rights and freedoms in a way that is comparable to discrimination on the grounds of another attribute listed above. So obviously that list is not exhaustive, and the final decision with regards to considering these is with the equity team. So if you feel discriminated against on the basis of something which is not included above, you can obviously still talk to us about it. And finally, as I mentioned above, but good to reinforce, you should not victimize people who initiate complaints or take part in complaints. That is strongly prohibited. So now we'll move on to the code of conduct. I believe Namita will be doing that for us.
Hi guys, I hope I'm good to go. So the code of conduct outlines 3 things, largely in terms of general conduct, just that you need to be super respectful of everyone that's present in the room, and just make sure to treat everyone with respect and dignity and not demean them at any point or any course during the tournament. I would say the first thing that comes under this is language guidelines, which is how you present yourself in terms of arguments, the sort of language and the sort of dialogue you should be using and should not be using while making arguments or even while interacting with people. The first thing under this is generalizations, and it's absolutely necessary to remember under any scope of argumentation or under any scope of interaction that you must do 2 things. You must, one, assume that the minority or person that you're talking about is present with you in that room, just to be a little bit more sensitive of the topic that you're talking about. Firstly, on generalizations, avoid generalizations or stereotyping people based on like a superficial aspect of what you know. Don't make sweeping assessments of an entire community based on a couple or handful of interactions that you've had. And then therefore, in terms of that, your phrasing of how you go with this also becomes necessary. In terms of, instead of saying that a community as a whole does this, you can say some people from the community do this, or some people from the community have noticed to do this. Also realize that it's not particularly possible for people in minority communities to necessarily have control over all factors of what they go through. And therefore, it's also incredibly important to maintain sensitivity when you talk about the sort of actions that they undertake or talk about the certain decisions that they make. So over here in the policy, as it says, it's given, instead of making a generalization that some people are unable to take this decision, you can insert an external factor or the problem that you identify as to say this problem is the reason, or this problem is the obstacle that stops this minority individual from reaching their goal. It's just a much more sensitive way of phrasing it and also impacts your argument better. Also, yeah, just in general, make sure that whenever you're making an argument, just to think that the person that you're talking about or the community that you're talking about is being represented within the room that you're in. Secondly, on like graphic language, and this also includes gestures, by the way, so including like gestures within your speeches to demean others is absolutely not allowed. Using graphic language in terms of wanting to impact your argument further is also something that we would advise against, mostly because while we acknowledge that some arguments may be better impacted when they're heavily when they have heavy rhetoric and heavy explanation and imagery, we don't think this sort of imagery might sit well with people, which is to say some people might get triggered or just feel uncomfortable by the amount of graphicness present within the argument. And this particularly becomes important when you think of using terms that are more visceral in nature. For example, we think you should use toned down words such as sexual assault or violence, just to make sure that just to reduce the potential of people getting triggered. Thirdly, on personal attacks, when you're arguing, it's absolutely not okay for you to attack a speaker, which is to say, at no point can you say, hey, you're a woman, what do you know about something like sports? Or hey, you're queer, what do you know something about like like actual relationships. All of that stuff is absolutely not allowed. You also can't attack a speaker for giving like a speech that you did not think was the best speech in the world, which is to say at no point are you allowed to say, oh, you can't even you can't even speak properly, or you can't even give a good speech. This also extends to the sort of institutions that a person comes from, their race, and etc. Just don't attack a speaker that's speaking, focus on their case. Lastly, on slurs and reclaimed language, we know that certain slurs and certain words have been reclaimed by minority communities, such as the F word, the N word, etc. Um, however, we don't think that members of not belonging to this community can use them. It's absolutely prohibited. But in order to ensure sensitivity, we also just in general discourage the use of such reclaimed terms, because they might make people uncomfortable and hinder their ability to debate in the best way possible. The third thing we want to talk to you about is gender pronoun policy. And this is extremely important because it's a little different as to what I think normal tournaments follow. We think that we encourage everyone to use gender neutral language as default in the round, which is to say, you're just encouraged to refer to people as like second speaker affirmative, take their name. Instead of using Mr. or Madam Chair, just use chair or refer to the panel as a whole. Just try to be more gender inclusive within your language. Speakers are at liberty to state whether they want to be addressed within a specific pronoun. However, we don't think that chairs are required to compulsorily make people state their pronouns in terms of preference, which is to say, unless someone specifically asks for a pronoun to be said, the default they, them, their is going to be used throughout the tournament. On misgendering, we recognize that misgendering can happen like misgendering can happen because people are just not used to using pronouns as of yet. We still don't think that's okay. If you have accidentally misgendered someone, please acknowledge your mistake, and please make sure to apologize to that person and immediately correct yourself. If you see someone else misgendering, perhaps your teammates, do that as well. We just want this to be a super safe environment. Also recognize, however, that repeated misgendering is a serious offense, and we will be taking action for the same. At any point, if you feel that you have been misgendered, whether it's intentional or unintentional, you may text any of us or approach any of us on equity, and we will do the needful that's required. Fourthly, on misuse of technology, since this is an online tournament, we do think there are multiple ways in which tech issues or like technology can be manipulated to make people uncomfortable or to just not provide a wholesome debating environment. Where do we think you have to be respectful? One, in terms of microphone usage, it's extremely important and compulsory if you're not speaking at that particular moment that you keep your mics on mute. Always mute yourself unless speaking. This extends to even when judges are giving their OA, unless explicitly stated by the judge that you can interrupt them in the middle of questions. Please keep your mics shut and make sure to do this at the end. Secondly, on misuse of chat, please note that everything in the chat can be recorded and will be like in the chat's history. Don't say offensive things within the chat when you're in a debate or observing a debate or judging a debate. We're going to treat these violations similar to those of discrimination or harassment, depending on the sort of chat that occurs. All this applies to both public chats as well as private chats when people would report them. It extends to the debate. It extends to just in terms of briefings, announcements, all social nights that may happen within the scope of this tournament. Lastly, on non-consensual recording. No participant or observer is permitted to record any part of the debate. This includes adjudicator feedback, panel deliberations, speeches, introductions, unless the person themselves has explicitly consented to the same. If anyone is found doing this, strict action will be taken. On policy of clashes, we've already released a clash form as to what constitutes a clash. It's given anything. If you guys still haven't filled the clash form, please do so at the earliest so we can submit your conflicts to the TAP team. This conflict form is going to be open throughout the tournament. And as and when if you think a conflict arises, please fill the form so we can deal with it as soon as possible. But please note that clashes are only limited to the extent where you think that being in the presence of someone is probably going to hinder the way that you debate or hinder the way that you judge. This does not mean that if you think a judge is a bad adjudicator, can you submit a clash against them? No, it's only if you have some sort of history history with that person that you think acts as an impediment. This can come in the form of them being an ex-teammate, them being in a relationship with you. Institutional clashes are obviously already accounted for, but if you've coached someone and been coached by them, all of those are perfectly legitimate clashes. What's not a legitimate clash is you thinking that someone gave you a law and therefore you think it's unfair for you to do so. Yeah, so that's the clash policy. And lastly, that's a clash policy. Just make sure that you don't submit unwarranted conflicts because that just becomes really, really inconvenient for all of us. If you're unsure of whether or not something constitutes as a conflict within your scope, of course, you can approach us at any time, on whatever channel you feel is necessary. And now for the rest of the policy, it regards to complaint procedure, I give it to Tunan. Yeah. You're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, thank you. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Namrita, for that. Hopefully, everyone can hear me. So before starting the complaint procedure, I would like to give you guys an announcement, which was given to us by the captain. That is that if any particular judge, is uncomfortable on judging on a particular topic, that person can reach the captain or can reach the equity team. We will reach the captain for you, and the judge will and the captain will see that if that particular topic is being debated on the room that judge is being allocated at. So if that is the case, they can allocate you to a different group. So do let us know about that. Now, in terms of complaint procedure, there are a few procedures. First of all is an informal complaint. In terms of informal complaint, if you're not sure that what is going on is in terms of equity violation or not, or you just want to discuss that behavior a person is doing in a particular debate is in terms of equity policy or not, you guys can come to us and discuss with us. That will be regarded as informal complaints, and we can ask you to take the necessary steps, or we can take the necessary steps for you in the future for that. In terms of formal complaints, that if you feel that person has violated the code of conduct or policy stated above, you guys can complain us in a formal manner using the equity form or mailing us or in WhatsApp, in whatever form you guys like. You guys can contact every one of us or any one of us that you feel comfortable. That is totally okay. In terms of anonymous complaint, if you feel you do not want your identity to be revealed, you can send an anonymous complaint to us, but do remember that you have to enter a point of contact. That person will represent you to us, and if we need any clarification or if we want to talk about this issue, we can talk with that person which you have nominated to represent you. And in terms, if you guys have any issue that you do not want any particular person of equity to hear the cases. So, for example, if an equity personnel has very close relationship with you, or have any institutional clashes, or is unable to adjudicate the procedure, we will skip that person, and others will look into the procedures just to make it as fair as possible. Yes, you guys can file a complaint in anonymous procedure. Right. In terms of processing the equity complaints, so what we are going to do, we are going to hear the story from you, and after that, we are going to hear the story from the other side. And after hearing the both sides of the story, if we feel we need to hear the third person's view, that what has got, for example, if it is a team complaining against a team in the debate, we will also talk to the judge to see his or her or or the point of view of the judge to see what the judge thinks actually went through that procedure. So these are the process we're going to follow in terms of processing the equity complaint. Now, about the procedure of red seal mechanism, that how we're going to process or follow the equity rules, or how we're going to impose them. In terms of that, there is an Article 31 of AIDA Constitution that actually gives us power to make a general announcement. We will make a general announcement that these are the something that have happened in some rooms. We prohibit you guys from doing that. B, we can explain the complaint to the offending participants and give them a warning to not to make them do that similar type of thing. Number three, we can give them a soft warning or a hard warning, or we can request them to provide an apology, that you are required to give an apology to the team that you have violated the equity against. Fifth, we can bring the relevant parties together to actually mitigate the dispute, to talk it over and solve the dispute as perfectly as possible according to the constitution. Now, in terms of that, in serious cases, the team may work with dispute tribunal, which is stated in Article 17 in AIDA, to recommend redressal, which may include varying from formal to informal event. That means we can stop that party to get informal and informal event organized by the tournament. We can expulsions from the tournament. We can remove them from the chat. We can blacklist them for any future tournament. So if you do some activities which we feel are very much discriminatory and bad for the circuit as a debating circuit as a whole, we can take some strict procedure measurement against you guys. So please be aware of these steps, as we tend to avoid, and we believe that all the parties or all the debaters here are actually very much well considered and well mannered as a whole. Now, in terms of in determining the appropriate resolution mechanism, what we're going to see the context of the offense. If the context of the offense we feel it is very minimal or unintentional, the actions taken by the equity team will be very much minimal. So the wishes of the victim, including the impact and likely impact on them, we're going to see how what you did, how much it impacts the person, and how does that hampers the mental health of the person. So we will take steps accordingly with that. The position of the complaints in the society, whether they suffer from a pattern of disadvantage, belong to a group, suffers from such a pattern of disadvantage, meaning that if you discriminate against a person just because that person belongs to a certain community or certain group, which is actually is something that we condemn in a high manner, and we will take strict measures to prevent this kind of thing happening in this sort of tournament. Now, whether and lastly, we're going to see whether the violation has occurred is a part of ongoing pattern of behavior. That means if that person is a type of person who has a pattern or a history of doing this kind of repeated badgering or hampering the environment of the tournament, we're going to take strict measures upon them. Now, appeals and decisions taken by the equity committee, that is that in Article 31.a of the AIDA Constitution, allows any party to complain, to appeal the eventual resolution of the equity officers by refer to the dispute tribunal under Section 17. So you guys can go to the Constitution and see how does this work. So before going to the last point about the details of the equity officers, yeah, we're going to show you the details of us and how you can contact us if you want to, and you can contact any and all of us. But we do want to give a note from the equity team, that is that we agree that a tournament such as Australs is a tournament where people from diverse culture, from diverse background, and from diverse history will mingle with each other, and they will obviously, it's a very big platform to share your culture and share your ideas with one another. and we do encourage you guys to know about other people and make a good relationship with other people. But we all we want to say is please be considerate about them, and don't be afraid of talking to other people, and don't be afraid of knowing other people. So we do encourage you to do that. And in terms of doing that, if you feel or if anyone feels that there has been something which the other person might feel offended, please be the bigger person, ask for apologies, and we do not want to limit your experience in tournament in such. And we do believe as a combined circuit, we can grow as by giving respect to each other. Thank you very much, and you can contact us via email or WhatsApp, whatever you feel necessary. Thank you. Over to the organizers.
Thank you, Tunan, and thank you to the equity team. We will now be inviting the language team to give a quick update on language applications and give a bit of a briefing around that. We'll just wait for language to come. Sorry, give us one moment. And we're ready for the language announcement once you're ready.
Yes, I am. Okay. Hello, just checking, am I audible?
Yep, we can hear you.
Great, fantastic. So hello, everyone. My name is Upi. I'm representing the Australs 2020 language team. With me are a very amazing collection of individuals. We have Adele and Fardeen from Bangladesh. We have Tanya and Ruthie from India. And we have Jeff from US and China. Very excited to be on the language team. One of the first things that we'd like to say is how we're very thankful and very excited for a great amount of applications that we have received so far. It's around 300 applications for ESL and EFL, which definitely shows how much debating proliferation, critical thinking, public speaking, and all the great things have gone into various spaces of Australasia, various parts of many, many countries that probably has not been as exposed to all of these good things before. It really speaks to how much now debating is a something that's quite very mainstream in various places. We're very, very excited to receive all of these applications. It's actually something that we've personally seen as one of the largest in any majors before. And possibly that is enabled due to the nature of the competition being online, which has its downside as well. It does not allow us to meet face-to-face, and certainly there are certain perks that we can only get in physical tournaments. However, the accessibility is also something that is very exciting to see manifesting in an online tournament. So very, very happy that there's a lot of excitement, a lot of participation from ESL and EFL speakers in this tournament. And hopefully this tournament will be a great experience for all of these participants and all participants in general. Hopefully this will make debating a lot more inclusive, especially towards the future, a lot more exposure for people who have not had prior exposures to that. So having said that, we have been assessing all of these applications, and we'd like to address some results of these assessments. You could definitely check the individual results of your language application, as well as if you're a general participant. You can take a look at which participants are classified as ESL and which participants are classified as EFL or not, or EPL, using the Google Sheets that is available in both groups, in Facebook groups of Australs 2020 participants, as well as the Monash Australs 2020. So please check them out. If you still would like to apply and you haven't seen your name over there, maybe there's a technical glitch, feel free to submit last minute applications. We're going to make sure we process it as timely as possible. And if we need to do interviews, there are still several interview slots available. If more is needed, we're going to do more interview slots to accommodate as much as possible participants in the future, just to make sure that we cover all of the interests of applying language status to your application and participation in Monash Australs 2020. That basically is the goal of the language team. 6 things that I'd like to sort of establish here, just in terms of specific situations that has transpired from the language applications that we have received. We have done numerous interviews for individuals that are applying as ESL and EFL, and we'd like to clarify some things as to how this process went, why the results were dealt as such, just to make sure everyone is on the same page. And then I'm more than happy to address these questions either in this briefing if we have time, or later on throughout the tournament in various social media channels as well. We're available in WhatsApp, in Facebook, etc. Right. So one of the biggest questions that we have received via interview or via personal messages is whether or not someone or how far should someone be proficient in order not to be classified as ESL or EFL? This is actually quite concerning because there are still a lot of conflation between language proficiency and language status. This is the biggest clarification that we would like to make from the language team. We do not see language proficiency as a symbol or something that is tethered to a language status. An EFL or an ESL person can appear or can sound or can, with using whatever standards you have as an observer, can appear completely fluent in English and proficient in using that language, good grammar, accent, all of these things, yet still a perfectly ESL and EFL speaker. Okay, what we take a look at is the background of the speaker, because that's how they arrive at that point as opposed to where they are right now. Okay, so the first tethering that we would like to clarify is that we should untether the connection between language proficiency and language status. You can totally see an EFL person being completely proficient, and on the flip side, an EPL person who might not be as proficient in English. Okay, this is very important because we want to also avoid a perception of, ESL status or EFL status being seen as less than, because they're less proficient and therefore you qualify for EFL. That's not necessarily the case, okay? Because language status is simply about where people are born, what kind of family they live in, what kind of exposure they have and had when it comes to their upbringings in their schools, etc. So that's the first clarification I'd like to make. Please untether proficiency with language status. There can be connections between the two, but don't assume that connection. Assuming that connection can be reductive to how we define ESL and EFL speakers. So let's not fall into that. Number two, we would like to sort of clarify what kind of standards the language team is using in terms of determining ESL and EFL status for various speakers. So what we use is the standards defined in the IDO Constitution. And that is standards that defines 3 prongs of background, i.e., what language do you speak at home? What language do you speak in your social setting with your friends, etc., and your tight-knit social interaction, hangout places, all these things. And finally, education. And with education, the standard is you have to fulfill a complete 2 period of an education, and period means if it's like a primary education, that's 1 period. Secondary education is 1 period, and tertiary education completion is 1 period. Okay, so that is a standard that we use when it comes to sort of assessing the standards of whether or not someone is ESL or EFL. And then the connector between these 3 criteria used in the Constitution is the word and, not or, which has a lot of meaning when it comes to our interpretation of that, because using the word and means that all 3 criteria should be fulfilled as much as possible to invalidate someone being ESL or EFL, meaning that if someone has English as a primary language in their education, but in social setting, absolutely no English or very little English, and in home setting, very little English, or quite a good mix between all 3, possibly they're not EPL, okay? So that would be how we read the Constitution. Happy to discuss further about this reading in private if needs be. Number 3, what we'd like to clarify is that specific rendering of how ESL and EFL is being defined in the Constitution may differ from how ESL and EFL-ness is being defined in various other circuits or other majors. In the world's Constitution, if I remember correctly, there are specific number of years that determine whether or not a speaker is still EFL or ESL. I think it's 2 years, but IDO Constitution defines it as period, right? Which means that there is a difference in terms of what is defined as a time period that needs to be fulfilled to sort of like take someone from one language status to another. So because of that, there can be a degree of Australs being able to be seen as more lenient and more open towards ESL and EFL-ness compared to other circuits or other majors. And that's how we kind of like see the Constitution and what is explicitly mentioned there. So that's a third thing that we'd like to clarify. Number 4, in understanding these readings of the Constitution, what we did was that we're happy to have a very diverse team. I'm from Indonesia. We have language team members from Bangladesh, from India, and from China. And we constantly communicate in order to make sure that we impose standards quite uniformly, we check with each other constantly. We use systems of having 2 checkers per application so that it's not just going to be dependent on one person's bias. There is, and everyone can see this process happening in the database that we see. So everything is out in the open. Nobody can does anything arbitrarily without anyone knowing. And finally, if you're going through interview, that would be the 3rd checker system. And we constantly discuss about how these interviews come about. And we're constantly checking each other. Are you being impartial? Is this sided towards one side or anything like that? Okay, so we try to uniformize our standards and readings of the constitutions, and in the process as well, we did have a standardized system of having more than one person being the interviewer, more than one person being the checker and reader of all your applications and all these things. So that is why, you know, maybe some of the process was quite cumbersome. We apologize if the process is not as quick as we would have liked or you would have liked. You see probably in the approval list that some are still processed after interview, or fresh applications still being processed, all these things, that because we want to collate as much as possible views from multiple officers in order to be able to justify a language status being given as such, and to take as much as possible anonymous votes for this. So that's how we ultimately sort of like establish a system that gets into a point of impartiality, cross-checking our perspectives and references we have in the past and from our debating circuits, and making sure it's not partial to any side of the world. Okay, so that's the 4th thing we'd like to sort of establish as to how these language status, ESL, EPL, or EFL came about and be given and be attributed to the speakers who apply. And fifthly, we'd like to also emphasize that, as per what I've said earlier in the opening, that we have seen an unprecedented amount of ESL and EFL registrants, right? And that also includes many circuits, many backgrounds that possibly have not been represented as much in past iterations of Australs due to various issues like visa, accessibility when it comes to flight costs, rego fee, various other externalities, or simply various things, basically. That's why there's a lot of issues that may push the definition of what is an ESL speaker, what is an EFL speaker, into being much more gray this year, as opposed to in past iterations of Australs. The reason why we're saying this is that because we have received a lot of questions about this, like what constitutes this, what constitutes that, and we just like to clarify that the only thing we're tethered to is the Constitution, right? However, the Constitution may not have interacted in the past with such level of grayness and such levels of complexities. In saying that, we think that if there are grayness that a lot of speakers, a lot of participants believe happening with regards to how the constitutions define ESL and EFL, we're more than happy to have this being discussed in the council, because this has to be how the constitution then is amended or being shaped into addressing these grayness, so as to sort of provide a more stringent metric, more explicit metric, all of these things. However, this would be up to the council. We're more than happy to encourage all of the teams who believe that maybe the current standards are too gray, to raise this issue in the council, so that they can sort of like be discussed in a more constitutional framework. Okay, and finally, what we would like to establish is that we'd just like to establish the first thing that I said, which is that the language status should not define quality, right? Because any EPL, ESL, EFL speaker can be completely good or bad speakers. It doesn't really matter, because possibly we're looking at how persuasive one's argument, one's style is. And again, style is definitely colored and biased as per the adjudication standards that the AdCore has released, which was definitely a great manual. Thank you very much, AdCore. For that, there are colors in which we have biases in which we see quality, right? Definitely, please not allow us to sort of like allow language status to be one of those standards, because that could be very much, you know, locking people into places that and spaces and backgrounds that they have no control over. We hope that this will not mar how teams, speakers, or anyone else's with language status or without be judged in this tournament. We hope there's not going to be any suspicion saying that, oh, if they're ESL or EFL, why are they so good? Why are they so fluent or anything like that? Because you totally can be. Just as much as not having a language status, you can totally be completely inadequate in fulfilling the needs of this activity and all these things, right? So yeah, we just want to emphasize that hopefully with these standards that we've established, we can have like a more clear understanding about how the language selection process works. And our main emphasis as to what the best conduct is for the tournament is, please see language status as something that is quite unseen. It's quite blind. It doesn't really matter, EFL, ESL, or EPL. It just matters later on to the break, but don't have any preconceived notions, particularly one that is tethered to fluency, proficiency, and all these kind of things. Okay, having said that, really, really thank you for Australs for being very accommodating and very inclusive to people from various regions. And this year's very much a huge level of diversity is seen, so we're very excited for that as well. I'm happy to field maybe one or two questions. I don't know if that's okay with you, Glenn. Yeah.
Yep, that's right. There is
Yep.
a Q&A, and it should be down the bottom of everyone's screen. So if you do have any questions, please put it in there.
Absolutely.
Or if you would like, you can raise your hand and we can get you to ask a question. So I'll give it a minute just to see if anyone has any questions.
Yes. And alternately,
while we wait,
feel free to.
We do have a question.
Am I audible?
Yep.
Am I audible?
Yep.
Sir, what's the issue is that we did not get a language registration format, sir. Language registration form, we did not get it. And in application form, we kept English as a primary language. Actually, in our education, we use English, but in general, what we speak is other native language we will speak. But in our education, from our childhood, we used to use English. So can we use English as our primary language as the option?
So if I understand your question correctly, you are assigned as EPL, English as primary language, and you would like to apply for ESL. Is that correct? Or
No, the morning I want to go to interview, but for language selection there is a tab, na. But they said that you are not yet registered your language.
Yeah.
Actually, in
correct.
my registration form, I already kept English as my language, but no, I did not get any other form from you. Where will I get that form? I'm asking. For registering the language.
Yes.
For registering the language.
More than happy. Yes, so the interviews are only awarded to those who have filled in the specific Google form, which is different with the tab Google form that is for tabulation functions. And the tabulation team and the language team and the ORCOM are quite separate, because we're only assessing insofar as language applications and language status and how they manifest in the tournament, not necessarily linked to tab, because if we're linked together, then the language team will be able to see all of your personal information, which is not necessarily something we'd like to dabble into, right? So what I would recommend is that I can share you the specific language application form, and only then we can assess your applications and then determine your status, whether EPL, ESL, or EFL. Other than that, we cannot, assume that someone is ESL or EFL, because we have absolutely no information about those persons. So we can only assign a language status if they have registered and if the registration has been received successfully. You might want to note, for anyone listening, that some attempts to register in the Google form have been malfunctioning, possibly due to a glitch. Some people say they have submitted, but we haven't received it. But trust, if you have received it, we will see it in the database. So if you haven't been processed when it comes to your language status and you're still listed as EPL when you think you have it's otherwise, feel free to resubmit your language status using the form that is necessary. I'm currently accessing the form right now. Yeah, I can share the form later on with you if that's okay.
Yeah, we'll get the form posted in a group as well later today.
Sure.
For everyone. We just had some
Thanks,
questions on the
Glenn.
Q&A. So the first one is, if a speaker in a team realizes they qualify for a different language status, but the team has a majority EPL status, how does this work?
Yes, so for mixed teams, if a team wants to qualify as EFL, all of the members have to be EFL speakers. If a team wants to qualify as ESL team, then it can be a mix of ESL and EFL, either 2-1, it doesn't really matter which way, or all ESL speakers. And then if a team has EPL speaker in it, the team will qualify as an EPL team, even if that team has 2 ESL speakers or 1. Okay, so that's how we sort of classify the team in terms of language status. Now, how the speakers who have a different language status with their teammate will be, how this will affect the speaker with a different language status than their teammate, right? How it will affect is with regards to the speaker award. So if you are an ESL speaker in an EPL team, or if you're an EFL speaker in an ESL team, you're still going to be eligible for the speaker award in your respective category, but your team won't be, if that makes sense.
Yep. And the last question was, and you may not have an answer for this yet, how many ESL and EFL teams are there currently?
Yeah, that's right, Glenn. We have not had an answer. We have had a lot of individuals who are still submitting last-minute applications for the language status, so we're currently in the process of finalizing it. We should have a more concrete answer by the end of today, hopefully by tonight. I'm still doing interviews in the middle of the night later. So yeah, we'll have a more definitive answer as the sun descends, so to speak. If you'd like to monitor the progress of the approval, feel free to check out the Google Sheets for language status approval. You can sort of like surmise the amount of teams from that document. We'll definitely have a clearer document that highlights exactly which teams are eligible for EFL and ESL status and all these things, but that would be later. Feel free to surmise from the currently existing document. That should give you a rough idea in the first place.
Great, thank you. Adele has posted the link for the language application now as well in the chat.
Yes.
So if anyone wants to see that, they can find that there. But otherwise, thank you for all the work Language has done so far. And I'm now going to bring forward the AGCOR for their.
Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks, Glenn. Bye.
Okay, cool. Am I visible and audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay, great. Let's see. Okay. One second. Is a slide up or?
It was, but it's now disappeared.
Okay. Give me a second.
Or I can share it, Sarah.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Let me just get it into a separate window so we don't have any confusions there. I want that one. Give me a moment, it's just an old computer. There we go. All right, all good, Sarah. I think we are good to go.
Thank you. All right. Hello, welcome to Monash Australs 2020. My name is Sarah Yun. I'm from South Korea. I'll be kicking off the beginning part of the AdCore briefing with a brief walkthrough of the format overview for this year's Australs. So let's go to the next page. Okay, thank you. Okay, so the core rules are 2 teams for the Australian debating format, affirmative and negative, 6 speakers and 8 speeches without points of information. Next, please. Back to, yeah. The speaking order goes as first affirmative, first negative, second affirmative, second negative, third affirmative, third negative, then negative reply, then affirmative reply. Substantive speeches should last for 8 minutes. Time signals are given twice, once at the 6-minute mark and another one at the 8th-minute mark with a double clapper bell, after which point the debater should be wrapping up their conclusion or finishing their sentence. Beyond 30 seconds after the due end of your speech, adjudicators are no longer permitted to take anything down that the speaker says into account. Let's go to the reply speeches. Thank you. So for the negative, for the reply speeches, the negative reply speaker begins first. It's a 4-minute speech. There is going to be 1 bell at the 3rd-minute mark and another bell at the 4th-minute mark. And reply speeches should only be delivered by either the first or the second speaker, but not by the 3rd speaker. Okay, let's go through the speaker roles. I think it's loading a bit. Yeah. Maddie? Maddie, could you? Was Maddie locked out?
Yeah, I think she dropped out of the call.
Okay, I'm just gonna share my screen. Let's see. Back in. Sorry about that. Yeah.
All good. Sorry about that. That is the joys of live TV, ladies and gentlemen. I think I'm no longer able to share my screen. The many joys of live TV.
Got it. Yeah.
Give me a moment. It's not giving me the option to share a screen, so I think that might need to be someone else.
Okay.
All right, now it is.
All right, cool. So to briefly go over the role of the speakers, although of course with some variance depending on the nature of the topic or the motion that you're given, to serve as a guidance for the first speaker, the responsibility is to establish the context of the debate, Where applicable, specify the team's model, stance, and definitions as deemed fit for the motion. Provide substantive arguments. And for the negative first speaker, it would be largely similar as the first affirmative speaker, but with the addition of rebuttals against the speaker that has just spoken. Okay, for the second speaker, the major roles are to provide rebuttals made by the other side and to advance your case. By advance your case, it may or may not be in the form of new and separate substantive arguments. It can be in the form of rebuttals and meaningful engagement. On that note, what this necessarily means is that the second speaker should not be penalized for not having a new argument unless they fail to meaningfully advance the case throughout their entire speech in any form. But almost always, teams can definitely benefit from having new and compelling substantive arguments or material in their second speaker. All motions that we have set for this tournament this year are substantive enough to encompass unique lines of arguments and analysis that would be able to be coming out from the second speaker. Teams without substantive contributions are very likely to be missing some useful and compelling materials, so please take note of that. And then for the third speakers, the major responsibilities are to identify the clashes or the main issues that occurred in the debate, to defend your team's claims, to refute and engage with important aspects of the other team. And here for the third speakers, no new arguments are expected within this role. In regard to no new arguments, new rebuttals, new framing, new examples, and new defense of the existing arguments from the team's case are okay. However, judges should not credit new material if it was substantially different or distinct from the existing materials that have already been presented by the team. Definitely remember these rules that we have outlined, but at the same time, it is important for the judges to be reasonable. Typically, you may not discount the entire matter entirely, but not totally ignore or neglect it either. So we believe that it can be definitely a gray area as to what counts as new analysis for the third speaker, but you should take into account whether it's new analysis and to what extent the new analysis is really new. So feel free to be reasonable in this particular point. For the reply speakers, oftentimes these are best understood as what is called a biased adjudication. In this speech, there should not be any new material or any new rebuttal. Rather, a reply speaker provides a strategically beneficial summary of the way the debate took place or the debate occurred. This can be done by using questions or themes, or it can be done in a more narrative style. There is definitely no correct or no right way of doing reply speeches. And like different uniqueness in structures or styles should not be punished unless it really leads to a certain lack of clarity for that reply speaker. The speech should be retrospective and reflective, speaking of things that already occurred and took place in the debate, and is therefore strictly prohibited from introducing new materials of any kind. However, that doesn't mean that it cannot rearrange the way that materials were presented or be able to link up arguments in a way that was not explicitly done earlier in the team. And importantly, replies can do change results in very close, competitive, and tight rounds, so please take note of that. A lot of these materials and meticulous details of the speaker roles and materials that are relevant to this are already well outlined in the official judging and debating manual that we have uploaded in the Facebook group. So please do check that document if you want any clarifications or if you have any further questions to the materials that we have covered. So with that, I'll pass over to Madeline to pick up the next session.
Excellent. All right. So I'm going to take you through some things to do with how to interpret motions and how to interpret the burdens that a motion asks you to take on. I'm going to make a couple of really quick notes at the start of this that I think are useful here. These are often presented by AdCores as, if there are these words in the motion is of this type. In practice, that can be a little bit complicated, and the guide in the manual takes you through this in much more detail than we're going to go through today, because what you're effectively asking each time you do this is, what does this motion ask the affirmative team to defend as a burden? And sometimes the wording can be a little bit misleading in that sense. So you could, for instance, have a motion that said, that we believe, which would generally imply a value judgment motion, so the first type here, and then followed that with we should, which would then make it a policy motion. So it's really important to pay very close attention to all of the words in the motion, just to make absolutely sure you fully understood the meaning of it. And if you ever have a question about what a motion means or what you're being asked to defend, those are the kind of definitional questions that the ACHCOR is really happy to answer for you at the start of a round before you do your motion selection. I'm going to take you through a couple of these varieties really quickly here, but please do have a look at the manual for more information. The first broad type of motion you might encounter, also just back a slide, the first broad type of motion you might encounter is a value judgment motion. So we oppose something or something has done more harm than good. These are generally motions where the burden that's being asked for you to take on is to prove that the motion is true or not. So it doesn't necessarily require you to get into counterfactuals. It doesn't necessarily require you to present models. It does require you to talk about whether or not something is true. Secondly, a policy motion. So these are usually motions that are defined by action words, so that we should do this, ban this, stop this. And what you're essentially arguing is whether or not something should be done. We can get a little bit more complicated with these because they can be modified by actor motions, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a moment. But an actor motion is where the motion asks you to take the perspective of a specific individual or group of individuals before arguing the motion. So rather than arguing from a default and generic perspective, you might argue specifically from the perspective of retired debaters, for example. We'll also get into regrets motions and comparative motions, motions where you're talking about the past and talking potentially about counterfactual worlds. All right, next slide, please. Yep, a few additional things to note here. I mentioned actor debates a moment ago. Please keep in mind that an actor debate will always say as group X or person X, rather than just that person X should do Y. So a motion that X debaters should join Model UN is not an actor debate. A motion that as X debaters we would join Model UN is. And that's an important distinction that gets at whether you're talking about a neutral third-party perspective or the perspective of a specific actor. Similarly, when you start to get into motions that are do X instead of Y, you're talking about a motion that is setting up a direct comparative between two things, and both teams need to engage in that direct comparative. Neither team can support doing both those things because they are set up as mutually exclusive by the definitions of the motion itself, even if they might not be mutually exclusive entirely in practice. All right, next slide, please. All right, this is where we're going to get a little bit more specific about burdens and models. I want to say a couple of things as general comments here. People often talk about negative teams in policy motions as having an option to run a counter model. In practice, every time you're debating a policy motion, you're going to have a model. That model might be do absolutely nothing, but you're still defending a position. And a negative team is always going to be defending a position. That position might be poorly defined, but they're always going to be taking a position. So it's really important as a negative team that you be identifying that and being clear about what it is that you're choosing to take on as your burdens. I'm going to talk a little bit about proposition fiat here. We're actually going to get into this in slightly more detail when we talk about the judge test later on, because we had a question on the judge test that got into a lot of detail about how to navigate this. And there's also some fairly extensive notes in the briefing manual on this. But there's one key principle that's really important to understand here when engaging with models and the burdens that you take on through presenting them. Proposition fiat grants affirmative teams the ability to assume that their policy will pass or come into place or happen. That means that you're allowed to presume that you have the political capital and resources necessary to do that. It doesn't mean that you get to define that the policy will be popular. It doesn't mean that you get to define that the policy will work. It doesn't mean that you get to define that everyone will choose to engage with the policy in the way that you want them to. It just means that you can get it into place. So that does have some implications for what a proposition team is able to do versus what they need to just defend and argue in favor of, as opposed to assuming will just definitely happen no matter what happens. Similarly, the negative team doesn't get to just take any resource in the world and use it. They are to some extent restricted to be roughly proportionate to what the affirmative team is doing. This is something that's often assessed a little bit through good faith, an idea that a negative team is not going to do something totally egregious here, but you can read in the manual a little bit more about the theoretical grounding for this and how it draws from the rule against truisms, which is the rule that you cannot, as a debate, set up a motion or set up to defend a motion in a way that simply defines it as true and then assumes that that's a debatable debate. So it's really important to understand that theoretically, but we won't necessarily go into more depth here given that's covered in the manual. All right, next slide. All right, we're going to move into talking about feedback forms, technical disasters, and other logistics. The TAB team is going to talk about this a little bit more, but there are a few key items of note that I'll cover here. Next slide. And I'm going to mostly cover here the tournament flow, and I'm going to hand over to Joe, who'll cover a few more of these things in a little bit more detail. The draw for each round will be released 30 minutes prior to motion release, which I know is a little bit different from a live tournament. That's to make sure that everyone has due notice to make sure that they are in the right briefing room before the round in order to make everything move as smoothly as possible. So the draw will be released. The draw will be released in a variety of forums. Pretty much anywhere where the tab is communicating will be where the draw is. You will also find that the room numbers are clickable, and the draw will get into that in a little bit more detail. It is expected that teams, and for that matter adjudicators, will be in their designated Zoom building calls at most 10 minutes before motion release. The tab team will do a roll call at that point. If you're not there, that will be a problem because you may be removed from the draw. That 10-minute buffer is the time that we need in order to arrange swing teams or potentially redo the draw if a sufficient number of teams are absent. So it is very important that you be there 10 minutes before motion release for us to check you off. You should also set your name on Zoom according to the tab guidelines. For everyone who has already completed check-in, which should be the vast majority of you, you will already have gone through that with someone from the tab team, AgCore or OrgCom. So you should know how that's supposed to be set. That's so if we don't hear you respond to the roll call, we don't cut you just because you've stepped away for 30 seconds to grab a cup of tea. Right before motion release, so right after motion release, the prep time will start. So that means we will start a timer as soon as the motion slides go up. And I'll say we'll talk about the technical details of this a little bit more, but the motion slides will go up simultaneously in every room. So those will go up. The prep time will start and teams will need to conduct their motion veto either in your designated breakout rooms or via Discord as the two forms of communication that you'll be able to get in touch with the team that you're against. You should be prepping in your own team with no one else. We know this is harder to police online than it is in another context. We do expect participants to behave in good faith here. You should not be Googling the motion. If you have a question about what it means, you should be coming to a member of the adjudication corps, and there will be one in every building. We also expect that you not be including coaches, other people from your institution, or generally people who you want to ask questions of in your prep time. Please do not do that. It makes it really unfair for other participants. And this is just an arms race. It's not realistically fair to get into. It does mean that it tends to privilege institutions with a lot of kind of power in terms of previous members who might be willing to help out doing that. So it's just a bad thing to do, and please don't do it. All right, next slide. All right, judges. Once all of the teams are present in a breakout room, the chair is in charge of that room and has the duty to make sure that room operates smoothly. We're going to talk about some technical details of that and the kind of glitches that might happen. Joe will get into that in a little bit of detail, but just please be aware as a chair that you have the control over that room and you should be making sure that participants have the ability to access it fairly and that any problems are reported through to the tab and the OrgCom to be resolved. At the start of the debate, as the equity team noted, you will need to collect the speaking order of debaters. We will be defaulting to gender neutral language at this tournament, but if a speaker does have a pronoun preference or indeed a member of the panel has a pronoun preference, that is the time at which they have the opportunity to express that. So please do make sure that you're paying attention to those. When the debate ends, chairs should instruct teams to leave the breakout room, not leave the meeting. I know it felt pedantic when we tested that with literally all of you at check-ins. please understand that you will stuff it up and it will be very irritating for the tab team. Do your absolute best not to accidentally leave the meeting, because it does mean you need to be reallocated to your room again. Judges at this tournament, as at all Australs, need to come to their decision on their own. You will need to fill out the personal Google form ballot link. And again, the tab team will talk about that in more detail prior to deliberating with other judges. Our goal is to have all ballots submitted within 10 minutes of the round ending. That allows us to keep to schedule, which is particularly important given the time zone difference that we're operating in. We're already going to end up ending absurdly late for the New Zealanders. Please be kind to them. So that does mean that you need to get your ballots in before you start having a discussion as a panel, as is required, and that should allow us to proceed on schedule. When you have that discussion as a panel, the expectation is that a chair will allow each member of that panel to voice why they came to the decision that they did. Remember that this is not consensus adjudication. You don't need to convince each other and you don't need to have an argument. Rather, every member of that panel should have the opportunity to clearly express the view that they came to, so that that can be integrated into the adjudication, but equally importantly, so that you can give feedback on each other and ensure that you're accurately representing each other's views when you do so. That does include trainees. You have approximately 10 minutes after that to deliver your oral adjudication to the teams. So again, you want to give a general outline of the adjudication and the result you reached. If teams want individual feedback, you are very welcome to do that after you have done that. But please make sure that once you've given your oral adjudication, you're keeping a close eye on the timeline so that you're turning up on time for the next round, and so that everyone in your room has the time they need to take a break between rounds, which we recognize is really important, again, particularly because lunch is going to be at some slightly weird times for different participants based on time zone. All right, next slide. And I think this is where I hand over to Joe.
Hello. Hi, everyone. I'm going to talk through glitches, and I'll talk through a couple of other things after that. Obviously, in a lot of ways, it's great that it's an online tournament because accessibility is fantastic this year for Australs, but it does come with a couple of issues. I think it's fair to say that, I mean, glitches and dropouts will sadly be inevitable at certain stages because of just a variety of random different things that might happen to different people's computers all over the region. So if a speaker drops out or becomes inaudible, our principle is that you treat it like a person with an extremely loud leaf blower outside a window at a university campus or a fire alarm or something like that. So what we'd say is stop your timer for 30 seconds or so and see whether the situation can be resolved. After that, we'd say exercise discretion. So if you're in contact with a speaker having technical difficulties, you might be able to leave it longer to resolve that. It might be the case that their laptop has just run out of battery and they'll be really quick to turn it back on, and that might be fine. But if there's no possible way that you're able to contact them, then it may be the case that you need to move the debate along. And we'll have swing speakers available if an entire team is unable to connect to the call to ensure that the debate can continue. Next slide. I think that went 2 slides. Sorry, I might go back a slide. No, that went forward a slide. Back a slide again.
Which slide are you looking for, Joe?
Handling glitches and dropouts, the second one.
This one.
There we go. There we go. Cool.
Excuse me. Wait, sorry. There you go.
Sweet. And yeah, if a judge drops out or is unable to hear, follow the same principle as above. Pause the timer for 30 seconds or so in order to check whether they can reconnect. If they're unable to reconnect, well, if they're a panelist or a trainee, simply continue the debate. And if they're a chair, wait at least 5 minutes before continuing the debate. And we'll try to ensure that all 2-person panels contain 2 judges we trust to adjudicate the debate on their own if necessary. Next slide. Okay, cool. So we understand that different local circuits within our broader Austral circuit have different ways or norms of ranking the motions in Austral style. So just to ensure that there are as few miscommunications as possible, we just thought we'd go over this to ensure that there's a standardized approach here in terms of ranking motion. So we'll take an example, 3 motions. One, that debating is fun, probably neg weighted. Second, that retirement is a myth. And third, that we regret the elitism in debating. There's 2 general approaches on our broader circuit. Firstly, rearranging. This is the one we're not doing, which is where if you prefer the first motion, if you prefer the second motion the most, the third motion the second most, and the third motion the least, you go 2, 3, 1. So you rearrange the motions in the order that you prefer. Whereas ranking, which is the one that we're doing, if you prefer the second motion the most, the third motion the second most, and the first motion the least, then your motion preference is 3, 1, 2. So that is that because you preference the third motion the least, people should be able to see how that goes there. But another note we just make here, which we were talking about as an edge court earlier, if at all possible, and this should be possible, please confirm between the 2 teams which motion you're actually doing. Please confirm the wording of the specific motion. So if both teams have come together and ranked the motion such that the ranking results in doing, say, the second motion here, please each team agree that they are doing the motion that retirement is a myth, and perhaps even just confirm the sides of that debate as well. That is F and neg. Next slide. Cool. Judge feedback. So 2 broad sets of ways that judge feedback will happen, judge on judge and team on judge. That is that chairs will assess their panelists and trainees, and vice versa. Panelists and trainees will assess their chair, and also teams will assess the chair, judge, or whoever is giving the OA if the chair has been rolled. The judge feedback form will be accessible through your individual TabbyCat links that the tab team has sent to your email. Please contact them if you have not received it yet. And the scale is below, so I'll just move through that briefly. 1, they should be a trainee and you're not optimistic that will change. 2, they should be a trainee, you're optimistic that could change. 3, they should be a panelist, but it's borderline. 4, they should definitely be a panelist. 5, they should be a panelist and maybe a chair. 6, they should be a chair, but it's borderline. 7, they should definitely be a chair. 8, you should consider this chair for the break. 9, I would be surprised if this chair didn't break. And 10, you'd be looking forward to watching this chair judge a grand final. And just a final note here, on reports of bias, please give us details so we know how best to handle that report. So obviously it's difficult for us as an edge court if teams or other judges are reporting that a judge might be judging in a biased way. If we're not given specific details about how that bias might manifest, why it might be occurring, I suppose on the ground details about how it's happening, because that will allow us to best assess what's happened in that debate and kind of adjust or fix things moving forward. Cool. This is where I leave you.
I'm just going to break in here before we move on to answering the judge test, just to answer one of the Q&A questions we've had come in. And this regards what happens if in a 3-person panel, the chair drops out due to connectivity issues and isn't able to rejoin, and the 2 panelists, or indeed 4 panelists, whatever, are evenly split. What we will be doing when we construct the tab is ensuring that judges are listed in the order of seniority in which we would like them to take charge of the room. So if the chair does drop out and disappears and is unable to reconnect, then the next listed judge would effectively take on that role, which means if there is an even split within the panel, they would then have the deciding vote. We hope this won't happen, but we do just think it would be useful to have that already set up and in place just in case anything else comes up. So thank you to the person who sent in that question. There's also another question we'll come back to later on regarding proposition fiat, which we'll come back to when we get to the judge test.
All right, hi everyone. So Kevin and I are going to discuss the judge test that all adjudicators needed to take. Thank you so much for everyone that has submitted theirs. And there are still a number of individuals that failed to submit their judge test. As per our policy, if you failed to submit your judge test, you would be allocated as a trainee for round one. This does not mean that that's the eternal status that you'll have in this tournament. You still have the ability to be promoted to a panelist and chair, and that depends on the feedback that you get from the consequent rounds in the tournament. So that is our tournament policy. All right, next slide, please. So firstly, how did we score your judge test? First, what we did was we did it by a double blind mark. By the AdCore, we anonymized all of your entries, and each application, each entry is assessed by 2 members of the AdCore. And if there are disagreements between the 2 scores given, there is a 3rd AdCore member that steps in to break that particular tie. In terms of the scoring proportions, so basically we allocated your CV 20%, the true or false segment 10%, speaker scores 10%, reason for the decision of the test debate 40%, the best speaker question and prop fiat question are 10%. Next slide, please. All right, so first let's talk about the true or false section. The first item is that if a speaker commits an equity violation in a debate, that speaker's team should automatically lose the debate. This is false. There are no such things as an automatic loss, and it's important for judges to be reminded of this fact. And if there are equity violations that you feel occurred, it is not the job nor jurisdiction of an adjudicator to decide what is an equity violation and what is not. It should be addressed to the equity team. So after the round has commenced, you may then approach the equity team and they will handle it from there. So as much as possible, try to be fair about it. Obviously, arguments that are offensive, arguments that are borderline equity violations tend to be unpersuasive. So there is still a possibility that that team may lose. However, it does not make them automatically lose the debate. The second item is a speech which is extremely stylish, but contains relatively little analysis, is unlikely to be persuasive. This is true. We believe that even though you're able to use all the flowery words in your vocabulary, but if it doesn't have anything to do with the topic in hand, then that means you're unable to fulfill your burdens as a speaker, and therefore it is unlikely to be persuasive. We felt that there were quite a number of judges that felt that this was false, that you can credit individuals solely based on style. That is not the case, and it's remembered for judges to keep that in mind. Thirdly, when a judge has difficulties understanding a speaker's accent, they are allowed to consult with other judges after the round before making their call. This is false. First and foremost, given that Australasian's format isn't like British parliamentary where you have consensus decision, you cannot consult with other judges regarding what specific individuals have said in the round. And if you have difficulties understanding a speaker's accent, we expect judges to make the most effort in trying to comprehend what was said. And if it comes to the point where you're unable to understand, then we believe you should base your decision based on that particular understanding that you were able to get from the team. Fourth, a chair who is rolled, i.e. in the minority, should still give the oral adjudication. This is false. So if a chair dissents, then that chair should allocate the duties of delivering the oral adjudication to a panelist that they feel can best reflect the decisions of the majority. So it should be up to the chair. Number 5, material which is not explicitly labeled rebuttal can still be counted as a response to the other team's case. This is true, especially that in debating, we don't really have that big of a separation anymore between positive material and responses. Oftentimes, speakers may choose to integrate their responses within their argumentation. This is perfectly fine. There are also substantive material that can deal with the arguments that come from the opposing team as well. So it doesn't have to be explicitly labeled rebuttal for you to credit it as a response. Next slide, please. Unless a team states otherwise, adjudicators should assume a utilitarian framework or that practical outcomes matter more than principled or moral claims. This is false. You should not have a default metric on how to judge the debate. You should take a look at how teams agree what kind of framework the debate should be assessed upon. If they don't explicitly agree, you should look into what are the implicit agreements that they may have, right? It is not okay for judges to say that practical arguments matter more than principled arguments. What matters is how teams are able to substantiate those claims. We think this is particularly critical because we've also seen a large number of judges that believe practical arguments should weigh more than principled arguments. That should not be the case. The 7th item, judges cannot decide the winning team based on reply speeches. That is false. It is completely possible for the judge to not have a clear decision based on the substantive. And when listening to the reply speeches, it might actually help them to make their decisions, given that reply speeches are biased adjudications where teams are given the opportunity to reframe their case. And so therefore, judges are allowed to give the winning team based on reply speeches. The 8th item, judges may change their decisions after hearing the explanation from fellow panelists. Again, this is false. This is not a consensus adjudication. You should make your own minds before having the deliberation with other judges. Point 9, contradictory points can only be taken into account as diminishing the persuasiveness of a team's case when the opposing team points out the contradiction out. This is false. A contradictory point is still a contradiction, even when it's not pointed out. As an average reasonable person, if you hear 2 contradictory claims, you should not be able to credit those contradictory claims because reasonably, you would not believe that. And so therefore, even if the other team does not point it out, you should still take that into account because that causes damage to the team's persuasiveness overall. Point 10, the winning team must be the one that wins the most clashes or areas of discussion in the round. This is false. It might be the case that there were 3 clashes in the round. Let's say that the affirmative team won 2 clashes and the negative team won 1 clash. But it might be the case that the 1 clash is the bigger area of discussion that teams decided to spend their time on, whereas the other 2 clashes that the affirmative won were relatively minor. They were not necessarily being as thoroughly discussed or have as much exchanges as the 1 clash that the negative won. So do not base your clash wins solely on numerical. You should also consider the quality of those clashes and how they contribute to your final decision. Next slide, please. All right, so for the test debate result, the adjudication court came up with a unanimous call. So we thought that the negative team won the round. The speaker scores that we gave are as follows. We felt that it was a relatively above average round. So for the first half, we gave them a 76. First negative, we gave 78. Second half, we gave 75 to 76. Second negative, a 77 to 78. Third half, we gave 77. Third neg, we gave 78. For the neg reply, it was between 38.5 or 39. And for the AF reply, it's between 37.5 until 38. So looking at the margins, we felt that this was a relatively clear debate with around 5 margins giving the win to the negative team. Next slide, please. All right, so what was the reason for our decision to give the win for the negative team? There were largely 3 broad areas of question that we felt made it quite decisive for the negative team. So the first question is that, is there an urgent necessity to establish an ASEAN Human Rights Court? So what we got from the affirmative was that Southeast Asia as a region has issues with human rights, and that ICC uses Western standards of human rights, which are incompatible with Southeast Asian nations. Now, why we thought this wasn't persuasive was because of a couple of things. First and foremost, we felt that affirmative didn't really explain what kind of relativism or localities that they were referring to. We were unsure about what Western and ASEAN standards of human rights necessarily look like. We felt that they tried to draw an analogy between the Chinese culture of individualism versus collectivism. However, we were not really convinced that that is the kind of localities that ASEAN necessarily has. But more importantly, is that we don't think that affirmative managed to establish why these localities necessarily matters when it comes to adjudicating human rights abuses. And so that's why we felt that the negative decisively won this clash for 3 key reasons. The first and foremost is that the negative was able to demonstrate that while they agree human rights violations occur in Southeast Asia, this is due to the fact that there is a lack of understanding on how critical human rights trials are, which necessarily means that the approach that is more appropriate has to be in the form of an education. And the only way that that can be done is if we have constructive diplomatic engagement. And this was solidified by the negative pointing out that you have Myanmar engaging with Indonesia and Thailand regarding their human rights issues. Secondly, NEG also managed to demonstrate that there are existing alternatives that allow human rights abuses to be dealt with adequately. For instance, when they talked about internal courts and international tribunals, the case study that it talked about was the Khmer Rouge regime in Cambodia, which we felt managed to demonstrate that we also have existing alternatives beyond the ASEAN Human Rights Court. And finally, negative managed to also point out that universalism of human rights is a standard that's needed, and that the localities that the affirmative wanted not only would be impossible to unite, but also it would blur the kinds of protection that is given to individuals. So we felt that negative decisively was able to sort of like tackle down the urgent necessity that the affirmative brought. And so that's why we felt that on the first area of discussion, it was a decisive win for the negative. Next slide, please. The second question is whether or not a human rights court is principally consistent with ASEAN values. So the exchange that we heard was that AF argued ASEAN's function is to develop economies, and economy and human rights are deeply interdependent with one another, whereas the negative argued that ASEAN has a non-interference policy, or NIP, to separate economy and culture with politics and government. Now, why wasn't AF persuasive in this clash? So first and foremost is that we were not particularly sure what was the direct link or correlation of human rights with economics. And we felt that negative managed to respond to this point by pointing out case studies like Singapore and Malaysia, which are 2 countries that are more economically developed within the ASEAN region, and yet they still commit human rights abuses. We felt that this was a strategic response to demonstrate that the link between human rights and economy was quite tenuous in that regard. Secondly, we felt that in terms of the analysis on the value of ASEAN, we felt that negative was able to truly identify why NIP is so unique to ASEAN, given the fact that all members are positioned equally to not judge each other. And that is how you're able to get good economic trade, how this is a prerequisite for you to be able to have those good sort of like trade relationship, because you're not necessarily muddying it up with politics and governance of each domestic countries. So we felt that the material coming from the NEG regarding NIP not only establishes a principal mandate for ASEAN, but it also serves as a direct response in terms of why economy that the affirmative wanted to have is something that is best served under the negative team. We felt that in terms of response, there was literally no engagement coming from the affirmative team with regards to the non-interference policy material. There could have been lots of analysis on why NIP is valid to be sidestepped or why it's less relevant to consider, but there was just literally no engagement coming from the affirmative on that issue. And so that's why we also felt that the second clash decisively went to the negative team. Next slide, please. Finally, the last question is about whether or not an ASEAN's human rights court would be effective. So on the affirmative, the argument was that the ASEAN Human Rights Court would be effective because richer nations have an incentive to enforce the court on others. And the negative responded by saying that there's going to be conflicts of interest that disables sort of like investigation properly. Now, there are a couple of reasons why we felt AF unfortunately was not persuasive again in this particular exchange. So first and foremost is that negative managed to point out that the flaw of the incentive structure of the AF is that it allows rich countries to enforce standards on poor countries, but not necessarily having someone that can enforce it back to them, meaning that they would be immune from that particular enforcement. And that creates an imbalance where these richer nations are able to commit human rights abuses and get away with it simply because they have good economics. The AF literally had no defense to this particular argumentation. Additionally, we also felt that NEG was able to point out that the economic incentive argument isn't exclusive, that Western nations can also impose sanctions on ASEAN countries that have a bad track record of human rights, necessarily pointing out that basically it's not a mutually exclusive benefit that exists only within ASEAN. Now, the second reason why we felt that AF was not persuasive was that negative was able to demonstrate the characterization of human rights issues in ASEAN, which is the fact that violators are either the state themselves or the powerful politicians that is associated with the regime. We felt that that analysis was critical because it managed to point out why the ASEAN Human Rights Court would not be able to properly function and therefore achieve a sense of justice, because they managed to point out either investigators would be difficult to be approved entry, or that there would be a perception that the outcome would not be as legitimate given that there's a lack of impartiality. AF did have a response in third speaker about how the judges would be elected and trained. However, we don't think that particular response was sufficient to eliminate the issue of bias that the negative raised from the first speaker. Now, we do acknowledge that NEG provided a counter solution, which is that we prefer to have ICC as the alternative. We acknowledge that negative did fail in proving why ICC would be more favored by ASEAN nations, why there's a bigger incentive for member countries to opt into ICC rather than the ASEAN Human Rights Court. However, we don't think that it was the burden of the negative team to necessarily provide a solution. Them proving that the ASEAN Human Rights Courts will be bad was sufficient to win this clash. And so those were the three areas of discussion on why the adjudication court felt that negative team decisively won that debate. All right, for the next part, I'll be handing it over to Kevin.
Great, hello everyone. We're nearing the end of the debater/adjudicator briefing, so just hang tight. I'll be going through the second half of the judge test and then some miscellaneous bits and pieces. The first thing I want to address is the second long answer question that we asked in the judge test, which was who you felt the best speaker in the debate was. Broadly speaking, we would have accepted any one of four speakers. So anyone on the negative team or also, and particularly for judges who believe that the affirmative team won the debate, the third affirmative speaker. We believe that in broad strokes, each member of the negative team had something new and unique to contribute in terms of achieving a win for their team. So first negative was particularly strong, we thought, on the characterization of ASEAN member nations and also the geopolitics of the Southeast Asian region. Second negative on the variety of responses to the affirmative case, and as well as fleshing out the comparative with the ICC or the International Criminal Court. And the third negative on reframing the debate in a manner which was strategic for the negative team, and also delivering new responses to the affirmative, particularly on the effectiveness of the proposed ASEAN court. We also would have accepted third affirmative as an answer, as I've mentioned previously, for the reason that we thought that they were, although not able to win the debate for the affirmative team, able to narrow the margin of victory to a significant extent by providing a large degree of clarity on how this court would function, as well as both responding to the negative team's concerns and to some extent proving that their counterfactual of prosecution in the ICC would be unlikely. We would find it difficult to credit either the first affirmative or the second affirmative speakers as an answer, given that the second affirmative speaker was generally non-responsive to Negative's substantive material, and we felt that both speakers had a large number of key premises in their speech that were left unanswered. Great. Next slide, please. Great. I'll now answer the question about proposition fiat. So proposition fiat, so we asked the question of whether or how the argument that that ASEAN member countries will not join this new human rights court should be addressed in the debate. The answer, broadly speaking, is that proposition fiat grants affirmative teams the ability to presume that the policy that they are being asked to defend by the motion will pass or can be put into place. So in this debate, that meant that ASEAN would establish a human rights court, but that does not enable the affirmative team to dismiss claims regarding how nations will react to or respond to the policy. So that is, for instance, it does not allow the affirmative team to fiat that members of ASEAN would fully participate in proceedings in this human rights court. It also does not, for instance, allow the affirmative to fiat that individual member states would not, for instance, leave ASEAN as a result of the implementation of this policy. So that means that this was a valid approach for the negative team to take, given that the question of the negative, which the negative team raised, was not whether or not the human rights court would in fact exist, but rather whether or not it would be effective. And that is the significance of the material that regarding, for instance, the incentives of ASEAN member states to participate or to not participate in court proceedings, and with respect to negatives material regarding the kind of uncooperativeness of member states with, for instance, pre-existing international treaties. I want at this juncture to also just answer a question that we've received in the Q&A. So the question is along the lines of, to what degree is proposition fiat, does proposition fiat allow an affirmative or a proposition or a government team to assume that other aspects of a policy that aren't specifically specified in a motion will be enacted? So for instance, to what degree can affirmative enact additional parts of a policy, such as fiating, for instance, how a particular policy might be implemented, or how a particular policy might be implemented, or kind of what restrictions on the abilities of governments to engage in that sort of policy, and so on and so forth. The answer to that is that it is within affirmative's right to have a more detailed model than is necessarily provided in the motion. And by and large, that is to some degree kind of just a result of the fact that motions can only be so long, and affirmative teams have the right to add layers to that if they wish. But that is subject to two qualifications. First, that does not permit teams to engage in kind of the creation of a model that goes so far beyond the realm of the realm of the debate as envisaged by the motion that it becomes a kind of entirely different debate. So, for instance, it would be impossible for the affirmative team to fiat a perfect world, for instance, in which ASEAN member states would fully cooperate with the court because, you know, they're all staunch defenders of human rights. That would not be possible. And the second qualification that I would add is that proposition or government or affirmative fiat does not allow the affirmative team to turn the debate into a squirrel of the motion as it is set. And that is to suggest that it does not allow the affirmative team to define out any possible harm that might result from the motion that has been set. So for instance, it would, you know, like it would not be acceptable for a team to limit the possible scenarios in, you know, it would not be acceptable for the affirmative team to limit the possible scenarios that a motion could apply to only a very specific set of instances, which makes the debate impossible to have. So those are the two qualifications to that kind of general rule about being able to expand the scope of the motion. Great. I'll move on to the next slide, please. The final thing I want to do with regards to the judge test is just note some briefly note some patterns that we noticed in marking the adjudication test that we want judges and speakers to some degree to be mindful of. The first thing that we noticed is that generally speaking, there was a trend towards undermarking speakers. Obviously, the degree to which you might credit a speech is somewhat up to personal experience, but we would encourage all judges to check your subconscious biases. The speakers in the debate did have accents, and it is true that perhaps in some circumstances they spoke slower than you may be used to if you come from, for instance, an EPL background. But that does not mean that you should automatically believe that they are deserving of a lesser speaker score, and it does not automatically make their speech worse. The second thing that we would suggest is that kind of as Bobby has already mentioned with respect to the reasons for the decision, negative teams do not have a burden to solve the problem in a policy debate. Yeah, their duty is simply to negate the topic. So if they can demonstrate why it would be morally wrong to do something, or if they can demonstrate why there would be more harms compared to the status quo, that is sufficient. To take an extremely simple example, in the debate that we should ban smoking, the negative team does not have to suggest that they could eradicate smoking in order to win the debate. All they need to show is that banning smoking would make the problems caused by smoking worse than they are under the status quo. Yeah, so many judges we noticed gave the win to AF based on the belief that they needed to solve the problem that both teams kind of agreed existed in the debate. That is not the way in which you should judge particularly policy motions, but also the variety of motions that you'll see at this tournament. Thirdly, on reply speeches, so one thing that we noticed judges doing is simply subtracting 40 from whatever score you would have given that speaker were it a substantive speech. Please be mindful of this. Obviously, we won't have the ability to edit your speaker scores after you've entered them into the ballot. So make sure that you're doing your math correctly. It is not the case that you just subtract 40 from whatever substantive score you would give a speaker in order to get their reply speech score. You should divide whatever score you would give them in half. So half of 75 is 37.5 and not 35. If you find maths difficult, I know I do, use a calculator. No one will be able to tell that you're using a calculator. So, you know, just do it if you think that you could be prone to making a mistake. Finally, on role fulfillment, one thing that we wish to note is that a lot of judges, in their answers to the judge test, and particularly and particularly the questions regarding who they believe the best speaker in the debate to be, answered that question on the basis of who fulfilled their roles the best. Now, it is a necessary condition to being a good speech that a speaker should fulfill their role. So, for instance, in order to be a good first speaker speech, it is true that a first speaker should provide some arguments that advance their side of the debate. But it is not a sufficient condition for a good speech. So answers that said, for instance, I thought this person was the best speaker in the debate because they were the best at fulfilling the role of being a second speaker, for instance, would not be a sufficient or a good enough answer. You need to go beyond that and look at what substantively they provided to that debate. Similarly, even if a speaker does not fulfill all of the roles that you might expect of a speech, of a particular speaker role, that does not necessarily mean that the speech is automatically bad and you should judge on the substantive material that they provided. A good example of this is with second speaker speeches. Often the belief is that the second speaker should provide some new substantive material, some new constructive argumentation for their side of the debate. But a second speaker who fails to fulfill that role and, for instance, purely responds to the other team without providing new substantive can still provide a very good speech that contributes substantively to their team winning the debate. So role fulfillment, while it is a useful thing to consider when judging how good you thought a speech was, is not the be all and end all and is certainly not the only condition for being a good speech. Cool. The final thing I'll note at this juncture also is we've had a few questions regarding whether or not we will be releasing your results from the judge test. The answer to that question is that we will not be releasing them. That is simply a circuit norm that exists at the Australations format. But you should know two things. Firstly, as we mentioned at the start of this briefing, your judge tests were double marked, double blind marked, and in circumstances where there was a substantial deviation, it was marked by a third marker. So we have reasonable confidence that your scores are an accurate reflection of your performance on the judge test. And secondly, as the tournament progresses, your feedback will kind of become exponentially more important to determining your performance as a judge. So I would encourage you to not put, while you should reflect on kind of where maybe you could improve, it would be useful to kind of not dwell too much on the judge test or think that your chances of being promoted to a chair are nil as a result of your performance on it. I'll just go on to the next slide, please.
That's it.
Oh, is that it? Don't we have some stuff on IAs?
We do. I think that may have been added separately. I'm happy to do that live. Okay. Give me a moment. I think Sarah may have been working from a downloaded version. Give me a moment. I'm just going to share another slide for you.
I actually think I got it. I just
refreshed
the page. Yeah.
All good.
Okay, fantastic. The final thing we want to briefly talk over is we asked our IA applicants a question regarding the ways in which you can identify internalized biases and train yourself out of them. You can read it on the screen. I won't read it out for the sake of keeping this briefing relatively short. If I could go on to the next slide, please, Sarah, that would be great. We kind of thought that this question was, in general, not answered particularly well by a large number of applicants. We were looking for a combination of the things that you can, again, read on the slide. There are a few salient points that I want to point out here. The first thing is that we, as an adjudication court, believe that the process of combating your internalized biases is an ongoing process. So it's not the case that merely because you've identified that you may be biased against a particular category of speaker in the past and taken steps to rectify that bias does not mean that it's a thing that you can simply set aside and no longer continue to address. While it's great if you have undertaken that process, we would encourage you to continue identifying circumstances in which you may be subject to that bias or in which you may judge in a way that accords with your own internalized biases, and encourage you to continue kind of questioning and combating your own internalized biases. The second thing that we want to highlight is that there were a large number of applicants who indicated that they did not believe that they personally had internalized biases. That again, I think indicates that we want you to make sure that you question whether or not the decisions that you come to, whether it's the speaker score that you award a particular speaker, or for instance, the result that you give in a particular debate, or which arguments you credit or discredit, are not being motivated by biases that you may not be subject to. Admitting that you have internalized biases doesn't mean that you are a racist person. Yeah, it does not mean that you're a sexist person, or that you are that you hate EFL or ESL speakers. It just means that the circumstances in which you have become familiarized with debating may be ones that lend you towards crediting certain types of argument or certain types of speakers more than others. That admission doesn't mean, saying, I am a racist because I know in some circumstances I am biased against ESL speakers. It just means interrogating the biases that you may have and ensuring that you are combating them in the way that you adjudicate. So that is the second point. And the third thing that we would encourage you to do is kind of, as I've already said, to kind of identify and put into place effective approaches to training against biases where you do identify them. Yeah, so those are things like making sure that you read over your notes properly and not just judge debates kind of impressionistically based on who you think might have won, or for instance, doing things like ensuring that you are looking at the substantive material that teams have provided and not merely whether or not you thought their speeches were particularly stylish or not. Great. I think that is it from me.
Excellent.
So back to
yeah, I'm just going to quickly jump in here to answer a couple of questions that came through as open questions while we were talking. So I'm just quickly going to handle those fairly quickly just in the background here, just to make sure that everything's super clear. The first of those is we had a question about how to handle a situation where teams have ranked the same motion number 3, i.e. have said we veto this motion, but have different preferences for which motion to debate. In a live circumstance, you'd toss a coin. We recommend https justflipacoin.com and screen sharing while you do that. It obviously will come up. Teams will need at some points to be able to determine which motion to debate. We will share a link to a website that will toss a coin for you. We think that's probably useful to be able to do. The second question that I just want to give a little bit more clarity on, just in case there's any confusion there, is a question around how to handle a situation, why it is that the opposition doesn't have the burden to also solve a policy when they are negating the government's case. The reason for that is that the opposition may simply not accept that there is a problem to be solved, and that is a permissible stance for them to take. It may be differential levels of reasonable in the grounds of the particular topic at hand, but an opposition does indeed have the right to simply say there is nothing that we believe we should do anything about here. The final thing I'm going to quickly answer here is we did have someone ask whether or not if you gave the debate to the affirmative, it's possible for you to still score well on the adjudication test. It is always technically possible. This was a debate where, while our adjudication team was unanimous that we found it to be a negative debate, from memory, when it was a live debate, it was a 7-2 split. It is indeed possible to make a case for the affirmative team. That's not a case that we personally think is the right answer from this debate, but someone who made a good argument for that could still have scored reasonably well on the test. It does just mean that we have a particular result that would likely be necessary for you to get in order for you to get top marks. And there are things that we're looking for and looking for an understanding of. It's certainly probably the case that if you gave an incredibly clear win to the affirmative team, we would have some question marks about that. But it is the case that there are people who gave this debate to the affirmative team who we scored well based on the explanation that they provided, the scores that they gave, which are the things that we're actually looking at here and scoring rather than just which side you came down on. I think, everyone, that's everything that we've had through from the Q&A. We've had a couple of questions about late tests. If you submitted it very slightly late, or if you submitted it within an extension, or you've successfully sent it to us and had it been accepted, i.e. you successfully filled out the form or you sent it to us by email and we've acknowledged the receipt, then your judge test has been marked. If you have not sent us a judge test, you will start this tournament at a trainee's rating. It will obviously be the case that your feedback over the course of the tournament may change that over time. We will not have time to mark further judge tests at this point, so please do not send them to us. There was a window in which we needed to receive those in order to be able to mark them fairly for you. I think that's everything, and I will hand over, I believe, to the TAB team at this point.
Thank you, Ajkor, and Varan from our TAB director can give the TAB briefing.
Thanks, Glenn. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you and see you.
Excellent, thank you. Let me just grab my slides real quick. Awesome, thanks everyone, and welcome to, I believe, the final briefing before we move on to the exhibition debate and the Women's Night. My name is Varan. I'm going to be the TAB director for this Monash Australs 2020. And we are going to cover a few things that are important for just sort of tournament operations in general. TAB teams are kind of the number crunchers of tournaments normally, but given the online format, we also have a role to play in the Zoom configuration and all that sort of thing. So the purpose of this briefing is going to be to recap a few of those things and make sure everyone's on a level playing field. I'm joined by an outstanding team whose names appear on the screen now. Please feel free to contact us at any point if you have any questions or concerns. While we do have official methods of communication that we'll talk about later, we are all also personally reachable via Facebook as well. So please get in touch if you'd like to ask us a question or you have any issues. We're going to cover a few things in this briefing. We'll talk about the TAB links that we've sent you, the process of checking in and the draw, Zoom etiquette, scoring and ballots, and then feedback on judges. Before then, a brief note on the structure of the competition in general terms. There are 8 preliminary rounds in which everyone competes. So we are expecting that if you show up for round 1, you are also going to show up for rounds 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. The exception to that are if you're an adjudicator and you have told us that you're not planning to attend a round, then we will obviously not allocate you for that round. The open break in line with the AIDA Constitution will be 28 teams. That means the top 4 teams will break directly to the octofinals, and the next 24 teams will break to the open partial double octofinals. The institutional cap for this competition is 4 teams per institution, but I believe no institution is sending more than 3 teams anyway, so it doesn't really apply in this situation. The language category breaks are yet to be determined, mainly because given the unprecedented number of applications we've received so far, the language committee is making some final assessments on what the appropriate size of those breaks should be. We will announce as soon as that is finalized, and what that will mean for integrating with the open breaks for scheduling and for all those kinds of things. So TAB links, there are a few things that we want you to keep in mind. The first is the tournament TAB site in general. That is the australs2020.herokuapp.com site. That is a common site that everyone can access, including those not at the tournament. The 2 personalized links are the TABICAT link and the Google form link. So each debater and adjudicator has a personalized page on the TAB website. That link was emailed to you a couple of days ago, and if you completed a TAB connection check, we will have asked you to confirm that you actually received those links. The Google form link is a special link for judges only. This was also emailed to you as part of the pre-tournament TAB information. The TABICAT link will allow you to see information that is relevant to you. So where are you going to be competing or adjudicating? What were your results in the past round? What was your history throughout the competition? It will allow you to submit feedback on judges. So you'll be able to click a button and submit your feedback. And if you are a judge, it will form one part of the 2-part ballot submission process, the Google form being the other part of the process. These links are confidential, so at no point should you share these links with other people, the exception being that top link because that is just a universal link. If you don't have either your TABICAT link or your Google form link, please email australs2020tab@gmail.com now. We'll put this link in the Facebook group after the briefing. Please let us know ASAP because particularly if you're a judge, you will not be able to proceed in the tournament without them. So the check-in and the draw process, basically, how do you tell us that you're here? There are kind of two parts to this story. The first is the process of just reporting that you are kind of awake and ready to debate. And that is what the Tabbycat check-ins are going to do. Right now, those check-ins are managed by us because that was our way of tracking who had done a tab connection check and who hadn't. But tomorrow morning, they will all be reset and there will be a button on your tab page to check yourself in. So when you go to your personalized tab page, there will be a button that says submit check-in or something similar. And then if you click that, you'll be marked as checked in. You should do this as soon as you are, basically as soon as you're awake and your computer is live and you have a stable internet connection. The purpose of this is not to say that you are ready to debate right at that second. It is just to say that you are there, you are contactable, and you are ready to move into the competition as the round start time approaches. The next phase is then the draw. So obviously the draw release process is going to look a bit different given the online nature of this tournament. Draws will be released on Facebook and on Tabbycat. They will also be released in the WhatsApp group and on Discord. So it should be fairly clear when these announcements come out. The venues on the draws are clickable. So when you go to the Tabbycat website or your personalized tab page, you will need to click on the venue that you are assigned to, and then you will be taken to the relevant Zoom call that you will be competing in. The draw will be released 30 minutes before the motion is released. That is so that there is enough time to move to your various groups. To address one of the questions that just came up, there is a WhatsApp group, but the purpose of that group is only if you cannot access Facebook and need an alternate method of contact. Our preference is that you are on the Facebook group, but if you are unable to access Facebook or you don't have Facebook, there is also the WhatsApp group and the Discord spaces, so you can still receive the announcements. So the draws are released 30 minutes before the motions are released. So we'll announce this, and then we will give debaters 10 minutes to find their Zoom call. That means you should be in your Zoom call ready to go 10 minutes after the draw is released, i.e. 20 minutes before the motion is released. The reason there's that big time buffer is so that we can do a roll call to make sure everyone is present, and also so that we can do breakout room allocation for you before the topics are released rather than after. If you are an adjudicator, as you may be aware, there are reasons to swap judges around, and the adjudicator allocation may take a little bit longer than the team draw. So what you'll do if you're an adjudicator is to just say, just wait until we give you the all clear on Facebook that you should then start moving to your Zoom calls and then join your appropriate Zoom call. You are welcome to join the first call that you see when your allocation is first released, but you should be aware that it might change depending on whether the adjudication core needs to make any swaps to the draw. So Zoom etiquette. We covered some of this in the tab connection checks and in the technical guide, but I'll recover some of the big points now. Debates take place across 6 different Zoom calls. That is because we would rather have people spread out for the purpose of breakout room allocation and also as a redundancy. So if something goes wrong, we can move people around quickly. Like I said, clicking your venue takes you to the correct call. So all you need to do is click the correct venue in Tabbycat and you'll be taken to the relevant call for that round. You need to name yourself correctly. So in the tab connection check process, we made sure you named yourself correctly, but a reminder in case you have not done so already, if you are a debater, you should include your team name and your first and last name. Pretty straightforward. If you are an adjudicator, it's slightly more complicated, but basically we want you to give us the word adjudicator, your name, and then some additional information that changes each round depending on the round number. So in this case, that example is for round 3, and then also the room number, so 2.02. So please make sure you change your room number properly after each round. A quick note on room numbers before I move on. Each room number has a sort of a first number, then a decimal place, then a second number. The number to the left of the decimal place is the Zoom call number. So in this case, 2.02 means we're in Zoom call number 2. Not the best example, but let's just go with it. And then the second number after the decimal place is the breakout room that you'll be put into. So for an example, 4.07 means Zoom call 4, breakout room 7. Again, this shouldn't be too much of an issue because all you have to do is click your Tabbycat menu. Really important point, your Zoom call may not be the same from round to round. So just because you're in Zoom call 1 for the first round doesn't mean you're going to be in Zoom call 1 for the second round or any rounds thereafter. You should always check the draw and use the Zoom call that is linked to your room for the round. and make sure that you join the correct one for the round that is about to happen. I can't stress that enough. Please make sure that when the draw comes out, you click the venue and make sure you're in the correct call. Like I said, you'll be allocated to a breakout room for your debate. The topics will be released in the main call. So across the 6 calls, we will synchronize the topic release at the same time. You should not move to your breakout rooms until the topics are released. Once topics are released, you should then go to your breakout rooms to discuss topic selection with your opposition and then secure that selection. And then once that is done, you should use your own method of communication for prep and for bench chat. So we don't mind if you use a phone call or WhatsApp call or FaceTime, whatever you'd prefer, just as long as it's something you can all use as a team to communicate with each other. Once prep time is finished, you will debate in the breakout room itself. So you will then return to the breakout room, turn your video on, but keep your microphones muted, and then conduct the debate in the breakout room. Once the debate is finished, as was mentioned in the adjudication core briefing, teams should exit the breakout room. That doesn't mean you exit the call. It just means you exit the breakout room and wait in the main area of the call during deliberation. Adjudicators will then call for the teams to come back to the breakout room for the adjudication after they've had their deliberation time. So this is kind of the digital equivalent of taking a step outside the room and then coming back in when the adjudication is ready. And then finally, after this is all done, feedback and just sort of general tournament chat can occur on Discord or some other mutually agreeable method. So for example, if your adjudicator and the team would rather just get feedback on the Zoom call itself, that's also fine. We don't mind how you do it, just as long as it is mutually agreed upon by everyone involved. We will, and for the question that was just asked, we will share these slides along with the article briefing on the Facebook group once we're done here. So these resources are all available. A summary of the rules: video always on if possible. So when I say if possible, if your video does not work or if it would degrade the connection quality such that we could not hear you, then no need to keep it on. But otherwise, please try and keep it on at all times. Your microphone should be always off unless you are speaking. So unless you are one of the speakers that's about to give a speech, keep it off. There are no POIs, so no need to have the microphone on at any other point. And you should not exit the Zoom call until the debate is done. So you should exit the breakout room to the main call during deliberation only. So we have a question regarding the like whether there's like a central briefing hall or anything, and then you move to your Zoom calls. There is no, while there will be like a central sort of briefing room that is there, we aren't sort of routing all announcements through that briefing hall. So it doesn't serve the same purpose as other tournaments where like the draw will be scrolled in that room first and then released somewhere else. That space is there if you'd like to just gather and chat, but otherwise you will, otherwise it is not necessary that you are in that briefing room. A couple of other questions we've got. The first one is, are we allowed to do mic checks before our speeches? Yep, that is okay. You can do that as part of, either as part of the breakout room process when you are doing your topic selection or before the debate itself starts. That's okay. The next question, is it round.breakout.room.zoom call or round Zoom call breakout room? I'm not sure what that question means. Basically just to recover the process. When the round starts, you'll be given a Zoom call to dial into. Click that link, you'll be taken to a Zoom call, and then you'll be allocated a breakout room. You can only be given one breakout room, so it will be the breakout room you have to go into.
Varane, I think that question's about adjudicator naming.
Adjudicator naming, yeah, that's, okay. I think I'll just post a clarification in the Facebook group after this, just so I'm not kind of speaking this, because I get it maybe a little bit confusing to just sort of say a bunch of numbers and dots. So I will post a clarifying message in the Facebook group once we're done here. Great, moving on. Now we look at judge ballot submission. And given the online nature of this competition, we are implementing some additional checks and some additional processes to ensure that score integrity is maintained and to ensure that ballots can be submitted quickly. There are essentially 2 stages to ballot submission. I've kind of listed the 4 steps that we need you to go through here. The first is that individual judges come to their own scores and their own decision. This is not consensus judging. You should not submit, you should not come to your decision collectively or scores collectively. These should be individual scores. Individual judges will then submit their own ballots through Google. That means you open up your Google form link and you fill in the ballot that you gave. Nobody else, just you. That should be done before any discussion is had with the rest of the panel. So really speaking, your panel should not be talking about anything to do with the debate until you have all come to your own decisions and you've all inputted your own ballots through Google. Once that is done, you should then confer as a panel and talk about the result, talk about the adjudication, and figure out whether it is unanimous or a split, etc. And then the chair will input everyone's ballots through TabbyCat. So the TabbyCat system requires that one person submits the ballot on behalf of everyone. That means if you're a chair, you should submit your ballot as well as your panelists' ballots. So just to recap the main parts of that, individual judges submit their own ballots through Google, and then they should share those results with the chair, who will then input those ballots through TabbyCat. If there are any questions about that, please do ask us before rather than during or after. We would really prefer if no one messed this up during the actual debate process. The one thing I will say about judges submitting their own ballots is that if you are a trainee, you do not submit a ballot. So your ballot doesn't go through Google, it doesn't form part of the decision, though you should still be involved in the discussion of the result. Your scores do not count and you should not submit a ballot through Google. If you are a panelist or a chair, you should submit the ballot through Google. I think I've kind of preempted what's coming in the next slides, but I'll cover them briefly. The Google ballot is filled in by each judge before discussion. It's your own ballot only, not anyone else's. There are no need for names. You just enter the scores that you would have given, and you must use the personalized link that we give you. Your name is pre-filled on that Google form when you use that personalized link, so you must use that link to submit your individual Google ballot. And the TabbyCat ballot is filled in by one judge on behalf of the panel. They submit all the ballots of that panel. So if you're a chair, you submit the ballot for yourself, plus your individual judges. There is no averaging or anything like that. You must enter the individual ballots as reported by each judge. The computer will then do the averaging and the score calculation as necessary. So the chair will submit everyone's ballots through their TabbyCat links, but each individual judge submits their own ballot through their Google link. And the TabbyCat ballot will ask for both names and scores. Importantly, ballots are closed. You should not share scores with anyone, and that includes things like margins or total speaker scores. You should obviously share the result of the debate. You should share qualitative feedback and an oral adjudication. You should not share quantitative information that you've written on the ballot. So who you thought the best speaker in the debate, who you gave the highest speaker score to, margins, etc., etc. Keep that information confidential. Next, judge feedback. This is done through your personal TabbyCat pages as well. So teams submit feedback on the judge which gave the oral adjudication. That means they should submit feedback on the chair or a panelist if the chair was outvoted. Chairs should submit feedback on panelists and trainees, so basically anyone they judged with. Panelists should submit feedback on the chair, and trainees do not formally submit feedback through this system, but you should still feel free to contact either us or the adjudication court if there is a piece of feedback you would like us to know about. For example, if a judge was unwelcoming or excluded you from the discussion or just didn't listen to you, that is an important piece of information that we would like to know. So please get in touch with us through email or through messaging as well. Finally, contact information. How do you get in touch with us? Where is the Facebook group? There is the Australs tab email, and there is also, I've listed my personal WhatsApp there as well. Please also note that we are individually reachable as members of the tab team. So if you need to get in touch with us urgently, you can do that, but it is more efficient if you contact us via these universal means. That is all from me here. If there are any other questions, please post them on the Q&A now. A clarification, do chairs submit everyone's ballots through their personalized links? Chairs submit everyone's ballots through their TabbyCat link, but individual judges submit ballots through their Google link. I hope that distinction is clear. Please let me know if there are any other questions there. Otherwise, I will hand it back over to Glenn.
Thank you, Varun. And that concludes our briefings. We'll now be moving into Women's Night. So I'm going to hand it over to Tamika and Gabby for that.
Just very quickly before Gabby gets started, I'm just going to remind everyone to please submit conflicts now so that the equity team has time to do any necessary checks so they are in the tab for tomorrow morning. If you don't get them in now, they will not have time to check them and there may be issues tomorrow morning. Please submit your conflicts now. The form is available in the group.
Hi everyone. On behalf of the conveners tonight, we're very excited to welcome you to the Women's Night. Both Tamika and I have spent a lot of time trying to work out the best way to, what would be the best way to have a Women's Night held over Zoom. What we've done is Tamika will introduce one of our sponsors, which are helping to make sure that tonight's been able to run. And Tamika will tell you a little bit about Michaela and her background. But first, I'd just like to say thank you to everyone for coming along to, I think, the first online Australs Women's Night. We're very excited to have you here. After the speech from Michaela, we will have a debate given to you by 6 very well-known women from around the Australasian circuit, and I will introduce them just before each of them speak. I'll hand it over to Tamika now to introduce Michaela.
Hi everyone. Gabby, Michaela is just taking a moment to join in the call. Shafia, would you like to say a few things?
All right, sure. Can everyone hear me? Hello?
Yeah,
All right, okay. All right. So hello everyone, my name is Shafia Jen and I am from International Islamic University, Malaysia. I myself personally is from China and I am the chair for the Women's Council. So if there are any issues pertaining to the experience faced by female or non-cis male representative as well as participants here in this tournament, feel free to approach me at any time or messenger me on Facebook. So before we get reached to our guest speaker, I just like to quickly say something regarding female participants here in this tournament. So I will also advise everyone here, whether being a non-cis male as well as like being a general participant here, I would like to advise everyone to try and promote the female participants to join this debate, because oftentimes I realize although debate being an activity that is very good and motivating, as well as like a very informative platform for us to be encouraged to learn and participate and be active and engaging. However, I do see a lot of universities are unable to actually provide enough of female participants, as in like getting them involved in debating due to various reasons that are unforeseeable. However, I do still suggest that I think it is a responsibility for all of us to try and promote debating among members who are like female and also non-cis males. I think this is like incredibly important because I find debating to be something that is of like transformational for a lot of us, I believe. That's why we're still here and participating in major international tournaments and being here, meeting new friends, etc. That is why I feel like it is a responsibility for each of us to do so and try and encourage more female and non-cis male participants to come and to debate and to make them interested in the event overall. So that is all that I have to say. I will pass on to Tamika.
Many thanks for that, Shafia. And your contact details, are they available if anyone needs to ask you any questions?
Yes, it will be available. I will also send the information towards the EdgeCore or TAP team, so it will be made available for every participant.
No worries, thank you so much. Just before I introduce our wonderful speaker, I just want to remind anyone that if you have any friends or any teammates or anyone from your institution that isn't currently on the call, if you want to invite them, resend them the link Sorry, my Zoom call just cut out for a second there. I'm not sure what happened. Um, sorry. So as I was saying, if anyone is on this call, and any of their friends who aren't on the call, let them know that the Women's Night is now happening. We want to promote this to as many and all of the participants as possible. We have a wonderful speaker and we've got a great debate lined up afterwards. So tell them to come on the call. The link is available in the Facebook group and on the WhatsApp chat. So get as many of them on this call as you can. So now I'm going to introduce our wonderful guest speaker, and I hope you're all really excited for this Women's Night. It's a very important night to celebrate the diversity of the tournament and really encourage and celebrate the talent of all the amazing women and non-cis male participants here that are participating in this really big, diverse tournament. Michaela is a representative from the Monash Business School, who is another sponsor that has enabled this tournament to actually take place and occur over this digital version. She is currently a professor of accounting and the Deputy Dean of Monash International at Monash Business School. And in her role, she is responsible for the strategic international engagement of the school. So she's very familiar with many of the institutions that are actually participating at this event. And I believe she's actually visited a few of them during her role. She has recently led the school to a successful re-accreditation by several important bodies. Joining Monash in 2007, Michaela is a highly regarded educator with her passion and commitment to the student learning experience being formally recognised through many awards. Michaela maintains a strong presence in the professional and industry circles, and most recently as a member of CPA Australia's Environment Society Governance Centre for Excellence. Her research focuses on corporate governance, financial reporting, executive compensation, sustainability, and integrated reporting, with her work being published widely across a range of international journals. She is immensely talented and respected in her field, and we are very grateful to have her here tonight. So I'd like to welcome Michaela to take the stage for her Women's Night presentation.
Thank you very much, Tamika, and thank you for that lovely warm welcome. It's my great pleasure to join you tonight and to also welcome you, albeit remotely, to Monash Business School, and to welcome students representing, I think, approximately 90 institutions across 15 countries. It can almost be seen to be a blessing in disguise, because this new mode of running the championships has meant that so many more of you are able to participate. I'd like to thank you for inviting me to join you this evening for the special Women's Night at the commencement of the Australasian InterVarsity Debating Championships. I would first like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation as the custodians of the land upon which Monash University stands, and pay my deepest respect to their elders past, present and emerging. I'll start by giving you a little bit about my background and career journey, before speaking about being a woman in the professional industry and touching on how you can thrive as a woman in this setting. And finally, I'll share some tips that I hope will be of benefit not only to women, but for any participant as you forge your future careers. I grew up in Queensland, which is the state to the far north of us here, and started university actually as a mature age student after a career at Telecom, which is the precursor to Telstra. I completed a bachelor's degree in accounting and graduated into a recession in the early 1990s. And so I suspect this very much aligns with the situation that some of you may all be facing when you graduate over the next couple of years. I think, thankfully, the experience of women in the professions has changed for the better since I graduated from university. I recall a question I was asked in a job interview at the time, which was, why should we hire you? You're likely to just leave and have babies. And this came from the partner of a Big Four accounting firm. Thankfully, that is no longer the case. So after working at a regional accounting firm for a few years, which was a fantastic experience because it allowed me to develop a range of skills in different areas of accounting and taxation that I wouldn't have been able to do in a larger firm, I decided to go back to do some postgraduate study. So I completed a master's, and while I was doing that, I was working as a part-time tutor. So I combined a role in an accounting firm with one in academia for a while before I took on a full-time position as a lecturer. And my career grew from there. Moved down to Melbourne in about 2002 and then joined Monash in 2007. So as Tamika said, in my current role, I'm responsible for the global engagement strategy and activities of the business school at Monash. And this means developing partnerships with universities and organisations overseas to provide opportunities for students and our research staff to engage in international experiences. And I really love my role. It gives me something different to do every day. I love engaging with students in situations that might be out of the ordinary, in particular on international study tours. And the most recent was when I accompanied a group of students to Nepal, which I absolutely loved. Finding opportunities to collaborate between partner universities. And I've had the pleasure of visiting many of the universities whose students are participating in this tournament in India, Singapore, Bangladesh, China, Indonesia, New Zealand, and Vietnam. We're finding now that more women than men are graduating from university in some of the professions, in accounting, healthcare, education. However, there's only been a small shift in industries which were traditionally seen as male domains, so engineering, IT, and probably to a lesser extent science. And in some countries where higher education for women was not the norm previously, so for example, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Indonesia, this is now changing with government programs aimed at female participation in education, but there's still a long way to go. There are still some gaps in income and moving up the corporate ladder. So some latest Australian statistics from the Australian government's Workplace Gender Equality Agency. Of all women aged 25 to 29, 44.5% have achieved a bachelor's degree or higher. And this is compared to only 32.3% of men. And women comprise 58.7% of our domestic students enrolled at universities. In terms of women in leadership though, women hold 14.1% of chair positions on boards of directors, 26.8% of directorships, and represent 17.1% of CEOs and 31.5% of key management personnel. Stats from the Australian Institute of Company Directors reveals that 30.7% of directors in ASX 200 firms are women, and women comprise 39.7% of new appointments for ASX 200 boards in 2019, which is really pleasing. It's been proven, and I've done some research myself on the financial outcomes of having female board members, that companies whose leadership teams is gender balanced have a higher return on equity when compared to organisation whose senior management team consists of men only. The reason behind this is that it contributes to a more interesting workplace, different views and ideas. There's less likely to be groupthink. In our research, we found that having at least 30% of the board as women leads to significant financial benefits for the firm. I'll come back to the importance of women in leadership roles for you later on. What does it mean to be a woman in professional industries? Probably the biggest issues that women face in professional careers, particularly when they might be in the minority, is what I might call imposter syndrome, thinking you don't deserve to be there. The first thing you need to do is to really evaluate your own skills and attributes and understand what you bring to the team and the role. What can you bring to your future career? Be honest about your skills and ask for the opinions of others you trust. There's a reason you've been appointed to a role. Others have seen certain attributes. It's important that you develop these insights into what your strengths are so that you can take your career forward. By the same token, you also need to be honest in assessing attributes that might need to be improved to enhance your future career or might be impacting on your enjoyment of your current role. I was part of a discussion recently with a woman who perceived she wasn't being valued in her current role. She said she was being paid the same as another colleague in a similar role with similar responsibilities. While her colleague met the requirements of the role and worked standard hours, the woman we were speaking with felt that she went above and beyond and felt that there was inequality in how they were being treated. No one picked up her colleague for not giving more, and they were paid the same for doing different levels of work. Others who were part of the conversation asked her to reflect on not how her colleague acted, but to seek to understand why she thought she needed to take on more than was expected of her, particularly if it caused her distress. And if she was doing more to be able to develop additional skills and expertise that could get her another different or higher level role, then fantastic. However, she needed to reflect on why she was doing more than she was being paid to or expected to, and consequently getting frustrated with a colleague who wasn't doing this. This isn't necessarily a gender thing. However, women often tend to take on additional responsibilities and therefore the mental strain that comes with this. She decided to have a conversation with her supervisor about the additional tasks she was doing and how this could possibly be rewarded. Because of the limited number of women in some industries, or as you progress up the corporate ladder, you might find yourself being the only woman or one of only a few. I've often found myself to be the only woman, either leading a team or as a member of a team. And I'm in that position now as the only female deputy dean in the senior leadership team of the business school. I've found that I have needed to develop a range of skills to be effective in this situation. Some, such as being more assertive, having the courage to speak up, and overcoming the desire to hang back and not put myself forward. I encourage you to take time out on a regular basis throughout your career to really reflect on where you've come from and plan where you want your career to go. While I was a senior lecturer, I made the conscious decision to maintain my career at that level for some time while I raised my young child. So I was able to balance both roles. When she reached the final years of high school and was more independent, I then looked at where I wanted my career to go and to think about how I would get there. I think the challenges we've all gone through over the past few months and continue to experience will in fact only be beneficial for women who want to balance career and family, where in the past many managers felt it was impossible for their staff to work from home. We found that in fact, this can be done very successfully, and the use of technology can enhance engagement across teams. Time management is key though. When I was ready to assess my career direction, I specifically sought out a mentor as a sounding board to help me reflect on what I wanted of my career. I'd found mentors to be very important in different stages of my career journey. I recommend you identify someone in your own lives who can play this role for you. And this person is likely to change as your career progresses. It doesn't need to be someone in your industry. It can be a family friend. It doesn't need to be another woman. I've relied on mentors of both genders in the past. In addition to understanding your own skills, you should also be honest in evaluating your own challenges and weaknesses. I know I'm inherently an introvert, and this can sometimes impact on how I act in large groups and participate in networking situations. I find this extremely challenging, but networking is an important part of the job I do. I've had to work on this, starting in small groups, talking with other women about how they do it, practicing, and most importantly, having courage to get out there. So how can you thrive as a woman in professional industries? First and foremost, look for an employer that aligns with your values and that values diversity and inclusion. If you're in Australia, for example, look for an employer which holds the Workplace Gender Equality Agency's Employer of Choice for Gender Equality citation. They measure and report on their gender diversity and inclusion performance. It's difficult to measure and improve on something you don't measure. Research by the University of Queensland for WGEA has highlighted some key outcomes from the targeted and strategic actions that employers with this citation are taking. They found a faster reduction in their gender pay gap than other organisations, a greater proportion of women in all levels of management when compared to those who did not hold the citation, a stronger pipeline of women moving in senior management roles over the same 5-year period, and higher representation of women on boards. Firms that value gender equality and inclusion also have been found by the University of Queensland study to have a few key practices which have underpinned their strong credentials. They prioritise inclusive leadership on gender equality at all levels of the organisation. They invest in learning and development for all staff in all areas related to strategic gender equality initiatives. They emphasise the importance of measuring and monitoring gender pay gaps in their organisation, and they develop targets and KPIs to improve performance. I would also encourage you to form relationships and support systems yourself. Maintain and build on any relationship you've developed at university. These will become really important to you in the future. I really encourage you to use the opportunities provided by these debating championships to develop this network. There's such a rich and diverse network of participants from different countries and universities here. Look for opportunities to engage in mentoring programs with industry and alumni. We have an excellent program at the business school, which has only gone from strength to strength during our current socially distant circumstances. It's far easier to get time in a busy person's diary to meet when it's a video chat than trying to find time to sit down face to face. Seek opportunities to build your network. Use LinkedIn to your advantage here. Undertake some professional development on how to use this to your advantage to build networks and to sell yourself to potential employers. Ensure you comment on and post relevant stories. Look at which industries you want to work in or which firms you want to work for and see how you can engage with representatives through this channel. Where you can, you should engage with women's networks or groups in the industry you're aiming to join. They're all out there in accounting, law, STEM, IT, finance. Look to activities they might be running for early career women or for students. Form a close support system. It's really important to have trusted friends and colleagues who can be your sounding board, but who will also build you up and be your cheer squad. You should also be able to trust this close group to challenge you and to encourage you to reflect on both your skills and weaknesses. Learn from and support other women. This is where strong female leaders are important. It can be challenging where there are a few role models in your industry or firm, but they are definitely out there. At Monash, we are so proud to have female deans in our faculties of arts, engineering, information technology, and medicine, not to mention a female vice-chancellor. In some of these disciplines, it's been challenging to find strong female role models in the past, but this is definitely changing, and our female deans are working very hard to do this through engaging with students in schools, with industries, and with other universities. Finally, how do you overcome hurdles? It's really important to communicate with others and to raise issues where they occur. Look to the informal and formal communication channels in your discipline or business. And where necessary, seek guidance from a trusted supervisor or colleague. As I've already mentioned, mentors and networks in your field are key to success as a woman, and you don't need to navigate it on your own. Seek out opportunities for mentorships, either formal programs or informal mentors, and learn from current women in your industry. Set clear career goals and update and revise these as you progress. Reassess where you want to be in 3 years, 5 years, even 10 years' time, and use your network and mentors to assist you to determine how you're able to reach these goals. Identify a sponsor in your organisation who can go into bat for you when positions come up. Finally, it's important that you find your voice and be brave. I have no doubt that participating in these debating championships will assist you significantly in doing this. I'd like to wish you all the very best of luck for the championships and for your future careers. And thank you once again for inviting me this evening.
Thank you so much, Michaela. That was a wonderful presentation. And I think there's so many tips there that, like, as a woman personally, I think are really helpful in trying to navigate the professional career post our university studies. If you'd like, we can quickly open it up to a Q&A. If anyone has any questions from the audience about anything particular Michaela has said or your experiences. You can either use the raise your hand function or pop it into the Q&A box. I might kick us off with a question as people popping them through. Would you say there was any particular moment in your career that you felt was quite defining in helping you gain that confidence to back yourself?
Probably about 2015, and I participated in a leadership program that was run by the Committee for Melbourne. So this was a 2-year program, and I was able to engage with other leaders, and most of them were a lot younger than I was, but future leaders in Melbourne, and it included a mentor as part of that program. So it was a partner at a Big 4 accounting firm, and just taking part in that program really allowed me to have the time and the space to really think about what I wanted and what my skills were and what I had to contribute. And I think from there, that's where I made the decision to take my career in the direction it has gone in now.
Wonderful. That sounds like an amazing opportunity. We have a question from an individual. They're saying that as a man, how do I relate to situations of a woman to become more of an ally and understand from a woman's perspective?
Yeah, that's interesting because I think men and women all, I mean, women are 50% of the balance of people in the world, and it's difficult because I think it's really about understanding what a woman can bring to the table. So understanding the different skills that women have compared to men. I think it's been said that women are able to multitask, maybe have more attention to detail, things like that. But it's about harnessing that as part of a team and looking at how you can best work together. And it's also about understanding that different women are in different situations. Not everyone is in the same place, and you need to be careful not to make assumptions that all women necessarily are looking at managing a career with a family. Some women choose not to have a family. So, and some women are in a family where their spouse stays at home with the children. So there's all different ways. So it's about not making assumptions about women, what women want to get out of their career, and also thinking about how you have complementary skills.
I think that's a really good way to think about it. It can be quite difficult to put yourself in another's shoes, but I think that's a really good way to conceptualize it. Another question, how have you found COVID-19 working from home, and do you think there's been any differences between you and your male counterparts?
Talking to my male counterparts, I don't think there's been any difference. I think we're all in the same situation in terms of uncertainty. Certainly there's been a difference that I have had to face with some of my colleagues who've got young children at home and having to homeschool them as well. So, you know, my daughter is now a university student, as you guys are. So she's very self-sufficient. But I think for me, it's been a challenge to work out a new structure to my day, and time management. That's my biggest problem, time management.
I think that's something that a lot of us can relate to, particularly being at home all day, every day. Time management, so definitely something to work on. Yeah. We've got another question from someone to elaborate on a little bit more on that transition from uni to the work environment and navigating that difficult time of uncertainty.
Yeah, it is such a difficult time. And I think you have to appreciate that the job you start in after you finish university doesn't necessarily need to be the be all and end all of your career as well. You know, there are so many different ways that your career can go. As I said, I started off working in a small accounting firm, which was in a regional town in Queensland. And I've now ended up in Melbourne at the largest university in Australia. So, you know, and particularly in this day and age, there are so many different ways you can take your career. And I think it's about thinking about what the skills are that you're developing along the way, and not necessarily the industry you're in, but how can you use those skills in different ways, and how can you develop skills that are going to be transferable in different locations and into different roles.
No, I think that's definitely something that we hear a lot is transferable skills. And yeah, no, definitely important to touch on. I have another question about AA programs, and what are your thoughts? Have you been impacted, or have you experienced any AA programs assisting?
AA program? What's an AA program?
Affirmative action.
Oh, affirmative action.
Affirmative action.
Oh, okay. Yeah, so affirmative action. Okay, so affirmative action is probably a term that was around and it was very popular back in the 1990s in particular. I don't think it's as popular as a term now, because I think things have now moved on to appreciating that it's about equality rather than treating people in a different way. But it is very important to, and I don't think I've actually necessarily experienced being part of a program that's been an affirmative action program, so to speak. However, I know what we are doing at the moment in the business school is we do recognise that in some areas we do have less women who may be putting their hands up for taking on senior roles, and we are trying to attract them to consider different roles. So targeting particular, emails to them where we might have roles coming up where we think they might have the skills that fit. So it is something that we're looking at doing. I don't know if I've necessarily been in a position like that, but certainly ensuring that we have diverse leadership teams, so, and not just gender diversity, but also cultural diversity, and thinking about how we can ensure we do that is something that's really important.
Absolutely. And I guess just one last thing that's nice to top off with is, if you had one piece of advice for your younger self, what would you say to help yourself on your way?
Oh, I don't know. Take every opportunity you can as it comes, because you never know what you can do from that.
Yeah, and I think that absolutely leads back into what you were saying about transferable skills, and you never know where those skills will come in handy in the future. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your presentation and answering all these questions. It's been wonderful to have you. And now I'll pass over to Gabby, who's going to introduce our Women's Night debate and the topic of that debate. Thank you so much, Michaela, for being here tonight.
Thank you so much. Thanks.